6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I got it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
Ranking review. Ranking review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the first of a 3-part epic rank and review. My regular guests, Mr. Lee Beckmann, and host of the Shelf Shedding Movie Podcast, Mr. Jason Dubray. They're joining me, your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, to rank our top 30 best horror movies from the 2010s. This episode, we're going to be ranking from our 30th to our 21st selections, and we're going to be reviewing Blood Quantum and Under the Shadow. And I'm not going to waste a bunch of time because we got a lot of ground to cover, but I do want to shout out the website Ranknreview.ca, and you can send feedback and your thoughts on this incredibly difficult rank to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's RANKNREVIEW@gmail.com. Lots of love from your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons. Thank you for your ears. Now let's just get busy. It has been a little bit over 4 years?
I feel like 4 years.
I think it was 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more, that Mr. Lee Beckmann and Mr. Jason Dubray and your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons undertook the epic best 30 movies of the noughties, as I was calling them. And even when that was freshly recorded, I was energized and excited. I was like, I can't wait to do the next decade. I mean, Beckmann and I have covered the 60s, but that was a lot of me self-educating and sort of
me too,
as we said during that episode, it was the best horror of the 60s that we had seen. I think we're about to undertake in the 2010s or the 20-teens or however we want to call it, the last decade of horror where it will be feasibly possible to keep up with the genre. I just don't think in the digital age and the streaming age where there's a half a dozen horror movies every week that it will be possible to be able to say this has been a pretty, I mean, as close as I can get to it as a fairly rounded and complete assessment of the horror of this decade. It just, I need to have a life outside of genre movies. So that
No, you don't, Larry.
That is a sad thing to realize. But I think the happy thing to realize is that undeniably in forming this list, and I don't want to put words in your guys' voices, but we are in a golden age of horror movies. There was such an embarrassment of riches to sift through that I have to fall back on my old sort of wrestling with the difference between the best and the favorite and making hard choices under that way. Like, on some cases, I chose my favorite of a specific genre, let's say remakes or whatever. I picked my favorite one over maybe the best one. But I didn't want us all to have the same lists.
Well, we won't.
There's no way.
I feel like maybe the deeper we get into the list, the more crossover we'll get. But that remains to be seen. So I guess we'll start this grand episode the same way I started the last one. Then, what does this decade of horror mean to you guys? And once again, all of us picked 2 movies to review.
Yep.
So I'll get you guys to tell us what movies you've selected and why.
Yep.
But just as a launch pad to get us onto the decade, for me, if the 2000s or the noughties was where horror got dark and grim and the grit came back into horror,
Yeah.
to oversimplify it, this decade horror got smart
Yep.
and got a little bit more satirically savvy. Horror movies became about something,
Yep.
almost necessarily. Like, as a fair measure, Session 9, which came out in the aughts and was pretty much ignored,
Yeah.
if it had come out this decade, would have been celebrated.
I'd hope so.
It was way ahead of its time in that measure. We have so many of these slow-paced, slow-burn,
Yep.
psychological horror movies
Yep.
that I could have made a top 30 of them.
Yep.
So, but when I think of this decade, I think of that, and maybe sort of more mainstreaming of horror. I think more legitimate directors are getting into horror, not as an entry point into the genre,
Yeah.
but they're making horror movies because they want to make horror movies.
Yep.
Not just because they'll be profitable, but because they'll be great movies.
Yep.
That's where I'm starting, but I tossed the ball to Mr. Dubray.
First, okay.
What do you think
Yeah.
about this decade?
I completely agree with you, and this felt like, for the first time since maybe the 1970s, which I wasn't around for much of the decade, but for a few months, horror movies had kind of come back to like the critical mainstream. It wasn't just something that was kind of outside and it was kind of looked down upon. Maybe some were looked down upon and dismissed too soon, but we actually have, you know, we were talking on the way up here about the Academy Awards and the problems with it, but we finally got to the point where some horror movies were getting some acknowledgement for this awards circuit. And you're right, they are a lot smarter. Like I kind of walked into the noughties having not watched much horror during that decade. I'd kind of tuned out a bit because I thought it's all the Saw stuff. Like it's all this extreme for the sake of extreme, and it's not really something I was interested in. I almost lost faith in horror. This decade, and I'll credit your podcast for this and the renewal of the friendship for bringing me back to, Jason, there's all these movies that you don't know about and you haven't checked out. And so listening to your show, or in some cases, well, I'll be mentioning ones that I reviewed with you, it's like there's a lot of really great stuff out there. It just was not getting the attention that maybe it should have. And I was just watching kind of like the most out there stuff, and I feel like I kind of returned to being a horror movie fan during the 2010s, and I wasn't really during the aughts. So I was playing catch up the last time, as you saw last time we were talking about these, and a lot of the movies that you have both put on your list, including Frankenfish, which was way better than I expected it to be. I've returned to some of those, and I was just like, man,
Frankenfish is like 87 minutes of pure joy.
it is. If I had seen that before, maybe it would have made the list. I don't know. So this one I feel a little bit more confident in my list.
Right.
But the frustration was there were so many great movies. I'm going to keep saying when you reveal your lists, oh, that was a runner-up. Oh, yeah, maybe, but
I have been like postulating future episodes of the podcast where I'm doing a review and saying to myself, this should have been on the list.
Yeah.
And that will happen over and
no matter
over
what.
and over again.
And, yeah.
this is the list for today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm open to the fact that it will change. When I was in my teens and 20s, I thought this list will always be the list. I'm never going to change the list.
Oh.
Nope.
My opinions
No.
on movies change big time. Even ones I watched a few months ago and then I revisit now, I'm like,
Maybe we can.
wow, why was I so hard on that? You
Ace
know?
Ventura: Pet Detective is the greatest comedy ever made and will always be the greatest comedy ever made, says Larry in 1992. or
So
whatever.
progressive. So progressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what about Mr. Beckmann? How do we feel about this decade?
Well, like I think it was the decade before where it was like the love of torture porn and, French New Wave hardcore cinema. This was the decade that definitely had a social conscience. I call it more grief porn. Those are two words that sort of come to mind. But
Well, they use the term elevated horror,
Yeah.
which I don't like.
Yeah.
Although I do understand what they're trying to go for there.
Yeah.
But it's dismissive of the rest of the genre.
yeah, I mean, horror didn't shy away from like women suffering. We
No.
we definitely have a lot of that, but it was treated with a more intelligent and respectful tone, even with the sort of slasher entries that were made in this time. I guess that's my first thought with this decade. Like you, and we talked about this constantly. The list is what it's going to be today.
Yeah.
There are so many good movies that are on this list. I actually kind of feel guilty about my list just a little bit. But it is
Hard
what it
cuts
is.
had to be made. And no. Am I happy with my list? No.
Yeah.
Because I know you guys are going to say titles. I mean, that's a fantastic pick. It's not on my list.
Yeah.
So, but I did what I could. And that is how good this decade was.
This is definitely the decade of Me Too. Like that had, I think, a huge effect of how horror, especially in the latter half, really started to get made and come out and talked about.
A bit of Black Lives Matter as well, I would say.
I think,
A little bit.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Not as much, but
I mean, I recently became obsessed with the Twilight Zone, the series, but I think that sort of social consciousness or the having a moral to the story suddenly became more important to the genre.
Yep.
And I usually like that, but I do find that sometimes, not always, sometimes that little moral lesson or that little social commentary ekes away at the scares a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But
I will argue
they've
that.
been increasingly finding ways around it. But that is the flaw of that approach, I find.
I will even argue for that with the latest Candyman, is that it was far more obsessed with its social justice agenda than it was the scares. Still a great movie, but I digress. It's a great decade. Do we want to do our honorable mentions in this, or
I think we should save that till the end.
All right,
when
fair
we
enough.
talk about. But if you want to talk about how you made your selections, a couple of criterias that I made: A, to start bearing down the list, and B, as an excuse just to wag my finger once again at streaming services like Netflix.
Yep.
If I don't have a physical copy of it, or I cannot own a physical copy of it, it is ineligible for my list.
Fair enough.
As far as I'm concerned.
Fair
So
enough.
things like The Ritual or Bird Box or a lot of these Netflix exclusive horror movies. I might have considered them or found space for some of them. It just helped me to make the list itself come back down to a manageable size.
I liked the new directors that showed up in this decade. We've got Jordan Peele, Ari Aster. We have the person who did The Witch, whose name
Robert Eggers.
We had a lot of really good directors, cut their teeth and
I
get their
think we
start.
should add Andre Overdahl.
Oh yes,
to that
we
list.
will. Yes. That was another name, and I'm sure I'm forgetting other names.
Oh, for sure. We'll mention them going forward.
Yeah, but I'll even say Peter Strickland.
Right.
We'll talk about that
We'll
later.
get there. Okay.
one other thing I wanted to say is, it seems like in decades previous, children were safe.
Right.
Yeah.
With rare exceptions, children can be killed. And I when I was revising and kind of finalizing my list last night, I was like, I have a lot of movies where kids get killed.
Yeah.
In there, and I know it's a regular thing on your reviews. You'll say you never feel any danger for kids in movies, but we no longer have that safety when we're watching a horror
if
movie.
they're the protagonist. It goes back to when I was a kid. Lee gave me, because I've been looking for it forever, this old Tobe Hooper remake of Invaders from Mars, and it's an okay movie. I loved it when I was a kid, but it more belongs to my childhood. But even as a child, I somehow inherently understood that because the central character was a little kid my age, he was going to be okay. And on some level, that feeling never went away for me, especially if the kid is the main character.
Yeah.
But it made it count when it didn't. In Jaws, when that little kid died, or in the remake of The Blob, where one of the precocious little kids gets sucked into the blob, that's a genuine holy shit moment for you.
Mini-series of it. I mean, it was in the novel, but
you're right. I think that it was there was something subversive or dirty or wrong about the violence to children thing. And this decade finally just decided, you know what? Kids are on the menu.
Yep.
In a very real way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whether that's a good or bad thing we can discuss. Is that what we wanted? We wanted more kid bloodshed in our horror movies?
We're just desensitized. That's all, man.
Okay. Is there anything else by way of introduction, or should we move on to the movies we're going
I
to
think we should pitter patter. Let's
Okay.
get at her.
Jason Dubray, you picked 2 movies for us to review. One of them, to my great I was very impressed. Not only had I not seen it, I had not heard of it. And I thought that was strange, especially after watching it. So, what did you pick and why?
The 2 movies I picked, I hadn't watched Blood Quantum, so I started watching this early in the process because it was a blind spot for me. I thought, this time I looked at your show to see if this is something that had been reviewed before, and it hadn't, so I kind of wanted to throw something new. And there I thought there's a lot of great stuff that we would all be able to discuss with that one. And then I was between a very mainstream film that you haven't, which will end up on lists, that you haven't reviewed on your show yet, and this movie I discovered called The Lure, which is batshit crazy.
Yes,
and I thought it is so crazy that I need to talk to some people about this, and who else in my life would watch this, and I kind of, by choosing it, forcing you two to watch this. And I thought this is going to go one of 2 ways, and it'll be interesting when we do the full-on review. But yeah, it's a non-English language, dark telling of the Little Mermaid, musical, blood festival, which makes you feel just absolutely horrible. But it's so
erotic eroticism.
Yeah, and
Yeah, man.
Visual-
Starting to worry there, Dubes.
it's
I love how crazy your
it
pick
is a
was.
crazy movie, and I thought
Maybe it's because
we need
I'm
to
a
talk about it.
father. I don't know.
So, Blood Quantum and The Lure.
The Lure, yeah.
And interesting to note, all of us, we each picked one foreign film. We didn't agree that we were going to do one foreign film each, but we each picked one.
I think this was the world became a little bit smaller during that decade too,
Right.
and the accessibility to Korean films and films just outside of Hollywood and outside of North America became a lot more prominent. And I know my list is filled up with lots of.
We'll talk
movies
about
like
The
that.
Lure. I will thank you in advance for introducing me to it, but
Yep.
it did not find a place on the list, I'm afraid.
And spoilers, it didn't make my list either, but I think it's worth talking about.
And that's the thing. So I kind of used my choices initially when I went into it as like, I want more on the list. So this is a way of putting more names on my list. But then I ended up putting one of them on my list anyway upon rewatching them because I just couldn't. But anyway, Mr. Beckmann, you also selected 2 films for us to discuss today.
Yes. Oh, well, so I went with, you can't have really a horror movie without its villains. And so I chose 2 movies where the villains are fucking amazing.
Okay.
Anytime you ape probably my favorite director and you're successful with it, when you're like doing a giant homage to John Carpenter, you're always going to get some likes. But It Follows has an amazing villain with amazing rules, and I'm kind of surprised it took this long to have, I think it's a demon more than a ghost that fucks its people to death. Like
Sexually transmitted haunting or possession. Or
well, see, I'm gonna argue it's a demon.
to be continued. We will
Continue.
discuss it.
Yeah. The other one, when we finally had set a date about when we're going to do this, like, I know there'd been a lot of movies I hadn't seen yet, and so out of all the movies that I'd seen, probably from like really August, like late July, August, when I started going hard, to up to now, the one that blew me away the most was Under the Shadows. I think it's something. It's very similar to a film it's tied with. I loved it so much. This movie really preyed on single mothers as well, which was interesting. But I was just sort of blown away. Both films, that film especially, felt deeply personal to the filmmaker.
Yeah.
You can tell that it like their blueprint was all over that story.
And it's a familiar horror story, but
Yeah.
it's told in an unfamiliar environment.
Yeah.
It was so close to being on my list.
Really?
This is how hard this
Okay,
is.
yeah.
I love that movie.
Yeah,
it
no.
way impressed me.
Well, no, I was blown away. So I think the theme for me this time around was just, I love me some monsters. I love me some monsters.
So my selections had to do with two picks that I was having a hard time cracking.
Okay.
I knew that I liked both of them, but I felt like there was something that I wasn't getting. The first one is the more obscure of the two. I think it's called The Black Coat's Daughter.
Yep.
You can also find it as The Devil's Daughter or February.
Yep.
I don't know if they kept on changing the name or re-releasing it or trying to find an audience for it. Very strange, but I think very telling of the vibe of a lot of the, quote, elevated horror of this decade.
Yeah.
This is very much one of those movies that fits that mold.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a place for it in the list, but I wanted to talk about it because when I first watched it, I liked it, but I didn't feel like I completely got it. When I watched it again for the podcast, I feel like I completely got it, and I liked it a lot more.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that I liked it enough to include it before that epiphany took place.
Yeah.
The other one was The Wailing.
Yep.
And this is a truly epic. It's like 2 hours and 40
2.5
minutes.
hours.
It's
something like
definitely
this.
over 2.5.
And it's hitting every genre in the world, and it's asking a lot of patience out of you. And I'm like, part of me was like, it doesn't really become a horror movie until the second half. Is it a horror movie? What is this movie? And then I watched it again, and I was like, there's no way I can live with not putting it on the list. So it did end up finding a way on the list after all.
Yeah.
But both of them, I think, speak for a lot of movies this decade that appreciate having repeated viewings on them. Like, it's a really riveting first-time experience, but then it becomes rewarding when you go back knowing a little bit more to see it again and understand how you were fucked with.
Yeah.
And I know lots of people that won't rewatch movies. They'll watch it once and that's it.
Right.
And sometimes I think that's a mistake, because you could stay with an opinion which can change over time. But the really great movies are the ones that enrich your life with multiple viewings and
that stick around.
You know,
I've reviewed so many movies where I've made the comment, it feels like I was forgetting it while I watched it. Or if I was watching it on TV and the commercials came on, I could very well forget what it was I was watching while the commercials are happening. And to be that dispassionate about a movie sucks for me. But to have a movie that gets stuck in my head, in fact, so stuck in my head that I got to go back and clarify some things for myself, then I think something's been accomplished.
Yes.
Is that a pretty satisfactory opening?
I think that's
so,
pretty darn good.
The time has come.
Dun,
Just before we get going, I meant to do this in the introduction.
Sure.
Special props to Jason Dubray for driving me down to Regina for this recording. So,
It was great because we don't often, other than recording, get a chance to visit. So this was
we
fun.
talked for movies for a couple hours on the road before we were going to talk movies for a couple of hours once we get here. So.
Or more than a couple hours.
So I just wanted to say that special shout out for Jason Dubray, host of the high quality shelf shedding movie show.
Here.
And now we are officially ready to start.
I'm sorry.
A rank of the top 30 horror movies of the 20 teens or the 2010s, whatever. What do you guys think?
20 10s.
I've been saying 20 teens, but
20
whatever
teens.
you say.
20 teens.
Let's do it.
All right.
Mr. Beckmann, 30th position.
So at 30th, I have my guilty pleasure, and I do feel guilty. Guilty, I tell you, because I know there are way better movies that aren't on this list, but I can't do a rank and review top 30 without guilty pleasures. So at number 30, I have Larry Fesseden's Beneath. It's a tie. It is actually a tie, but I have Larry Fesseden's Beneath. The script has a little creaks and moans, and the acting sometimes is a little bit meh, but I love me a killer fish movie. I really, really do. It tickles me right here.
Well, that makes me think I know what it's tied with.
Yep, I think you do. And it's just and the creature looks like a giant pike. It really does, and I love it for it. So the tie, and Thank you, Larry. Thank you for showing me this movie. I have never seen a movie so, I know this is not the most politically correct term, schizophrenic in quality, because the bookends of this movie are absolutely terrible. I sort of think of Hatchet a little bit, but I think Hatchet was deliberate. But I have that 47 Meters Down, the sequel.
That's actually not what I was thinking of.
Really, which one?
I will tell you in a moment.
Okay. The
47 Meters Down, Uncaged.
Uncaged.
One of the more amusing reviews that you and I have done in recent memory.
I can't tell you that both, like, the first 15 minutes and the climax are so awful. But the second that the scuba divers go down into the cave all the way to the escape, I think is pure horror gold.
Yeah.
I actually ranked it higher in our podcast than Dr. Sleep, and I do feel some shame.
Yeah, you're out of your fucking
I forgot
mind.
about that.
I know, and I know this, but I thought about that movie for days, Larry, and I just knew that it hit me, it tickled me right
Hey,
here.
that's what a guilty pleasure position is for.
Yeah, so I hang my head in shame, but I loved me 47 Meters Down.
You love what you love, right?
And
Yeah.
you know what? That middle section of the movie does work in, especially because I'm a shark person.
Yeah.
It does work in the holy shit, what the fuck are they going to do?
Yeah.
But the first 20 minutes and the last 20
It's-
minutes are unforgivable.
No, like never has a top 30 movie where such like awful writing, directing, acting. It's just like, whoo.
Have you seen Beneath or 47 Meters Down?
I've seen 47 Meters Down. Yeah, I've seen both films there. I have not seen Beneath, so you might have to share a little bit of that for me. I've heard of it, but I haven't watched it. 47 Meters Down, that sequel. I remember like the action part of it. I enjoyed. Was it both of you that didn't like the first one? Like, I know you really, Larry, you really didn't like the first one, 47 Meters Down with Mandy Moore.
It's hard to get into without wrecking the movie.
Yeah.
There's a big twist in the movie that I take issue with.
I think right time or whatever, like it was almost a runner-up for this list, the first one. Second one I liked enough, but I didn't love it. But I mean, I get it. I mean, I get why those movies work. So, Beneath, tell me about Beneath.
Beneath is basically a story about a bunch of, I'd say, college kids, you would say.
Yeah.
Kids in their either early 20s or late teens that...
It's a giant fish in a lake.
Yeah.
There's a legend about the lake.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of kids. They're not really likable. They get stranded and they get sieged by this fish.
Yeah.
That's basically the movie.
So I've seen movies like this before.
But
It's micro budget and it's Larry Fessenden, although it's not, I don't believe, his original screenplay.
No,
think
it's
someone else's.
written by somebody else's. Yes, I actually
I have
for a
it
second
here.
there.
I'm a big Fessenden fan, but that one didn't make the list for me.
Yeah.
Dagan Merrill.
Well, it says here Tony Daniel and Brian D. Smith, but...
Am I looking at the wrong Beneath? No, I'm looking at the wrong Beneath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will concede that the script does have some creaks and moans, but...
And you can tell it's a micro budget movie.
Oh, yeah.
You have to go in knowing that and be prepared for it.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to meet the movie halfway, it does the job. Yeah.
I did so lovingly.
Yeah.
I did. So, I was like, you got me in the giblets, man. In the giblets.
All right.
There's 2 million movies named Beneath here, so I'm going to find it on my
Larry Fessenden,
IMDb.
look up
But
the
I'll look
director.
up through Fessenden later. Yeah, based on last time, I'm writing down the ones that I haven't seen for
So you have a
future
nice long
horror
list of
homework.
homework.
Yeah. Hopefully,
What was your
hopefully it'll be
third?
a less long than last time. But okay, there's a couple in here where you might get the argument that these aren't horror movies, but this one really affected me. I got so deep. It's actually a documentary called Catfish, directed by Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost. And this is kind of before this term was really known. Now it's a little bit more known about, this guy kind of finds out about this young girl who's a prodigy in this small town in Michigan, and does paintings of his photography and his articles, and then gets introduced to this family and starts to fall in love with this member of the family. And have phone conversations and all kinds of interesting things. And he's in New York. And then there's this chance to maybe go and meet when they get this job in Colorado. and his brother and his filmmaking partner have been kind of following this story along as a possible film, and then it changes completely when there's some stuff that seems kind of suspicious, and then the middle part and this mystery, and when they decide to go and figure out what's going on with this family, and they end up going into like this dark farmyard, and I was just like, I have no idea what's going to happen to these people. Like, they likely survive because this is a documentary that's been released, but it creeped the hell out of me the first time. I did a rewatch of it. I knew everything that was going to happen, but it still kind of bothered me, and I found some of the horror a little bit relatable, in some ways, and we're a lot more aware of this kind of stuff now. But we're looking at, I think this was 2010, so here we are, like,
I think that
nearly 14 years later, people are less willing to sort of accept that, you know, some random person that they're talking to on the phone or on social media is who they actually say they
I
are.
think the older you are in this generation we're in now, the more technophobic you are. The younger you are, you're less so. Apparently, the younger you are, the more you are susceptible you are to being scammed online.
Yeah.
And you'd think intuitively the opposite would be true, but people trust who they talk to online way more than they should have. And I think Catfish exploits that. I also, like, I wanted to try to find a spot in my list because it's a newish genre that, like, there's screen-based horrors, like Unfriended and Searching, and I couldn't, again, find a place for one on the list, but, like, I think that is in that neighborhood too.
It is.
I really liked that movie, but I don't know why. It never really registered high enough on my brain to consider it seriously for the list. But I do like the movie. Like, I'm sure most of the movies we're going to be talking about today are like, yep, solid entry for sure.
And I have to be honest, like, there was something kind of in my life in the early 2000s that was very similar to this.
Oh, I see.
So that might be kind of a personal, like, I could different background than this guy who lives in New York and is an artist or whatever, but I could kind of relate to this. But when it was, you know, the middle part, and when we get some of, like, it starts off very creepy and we get to know kind of what the story is, it becomes a little bit different. So you could argue it's not a horror movie, but I think for the victim of this, it's just, how was I this susceptible to have been scammed in this way? And so this is one of 3 or 4 that you might argue don't completely fit the horror genre completely. But
I would say close enough. Do you have any experience with Catfish? Do you know the movie?
I know of the film. I have not seen it. I know the story, and I think it's based off a true story. Is it not?
yeah,
Well, and
it's a
spawned
documentary.
TV
So
series.
it's everything happened kind of. They found out the information as they were filming, and they kind of didn't know what they were going to be walking into. So
I respect it. I respect it. No, I've got a documentary in my shout out. So yeah.
So that's good for Catfish. In my 30th position, I wasn't going to do a guilty pleasure. And then I was talking to Beckmann, and Beckmann's like, I'm definitely doing a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
And then I was like, yeah, you're right. I probably should. And my brain defaulted to Alexander Aja's Piranha 3D.
Yeah.
I'd already made that really high on my list of guilty pleasures in the guilty pleasure episode. So I will acknowledge that is an incredibly stupid, incredibly enjoyable movie that maybe should be there. And the other one that I guess we can call an honorable mention, probably the most fucked up movie released by a major studio in the decade, about 2 Canadian actors who reignite their friendship during an apocalypse at a celebrity's party.
Okay.
This is the end. I just think that movie is so insane that like points for existing.
Yeah.
But
it's a comedy.
I'm me, so I went for the most unknown, uncelebrated Larry pick. J.T. Petty, from the director of The Burrowers.
Oh wow.
I give you Hellbenders.
Yeah.
Hellbenders is about a group of priests who have to live in sin because their job is to exorcise demons and, if necessary, kill themselves and literally drag the demon to hell with them. The cast includes Clancy Brown, of which I've made my love known quite a few times.
I do believe he's a Ranknreview award-winning actor.
Absolutely.
Has he ever returned the love?
No, he's never said a word to me, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
But I love how subversive it is. I like these priests are like they could commit terrible acts as part of their duty as a priest, and this really strange eclectic cast. You do not know where the movie's going. It's not exactly funny. It's not exactly scary, but it is very strange.
Yeah.
And it's just got such a distinct personality. And J.T. Petty has not made another movie since this, and like he's writing for like video games, and I don't know. I feel like he deserved a better than he got out of the Hollywood system, because he made some really cool little movies, and I include this one among them. Most of the people listening to us have never heard of it.
That's true. That's true.
So here it is in 30th position.
Yeah. And you recommended The Burrowers to me, and I watched it after our aughts show, and it was near perfect. So if this is in that same ballpark, then I will check it out, but I have not seen it.
It is a guilty pleasure. I mean, if you're going to compare the quality of this movie with the rest of the list, it's going to suffer by comparison. But again, it's the obscure, not obvious Larry pick.
No, color me surprised. All right, at number 29, I have Gore Verbinski's A Cure for Wellness. I'm always skeptical about wellness centers to begin with, so the fact that they made a movie about it, yay! That movie is so beautifully shot. Like, it examines a lot of the elements of visual art, the shot compositions of it all. It is a gorgeous movie to look at. I will argue it does run a little long, especially in sort of in the third act, but I just couldn't stop watching that movie. I love everything about it. I think it was great. So I have A Cure for Wellness by Gore Verbinski, who I think is wonderfully insane.
And it could be accused of being elevated horror as well. It's a slow burn. And I think the first time I watched it, I watched it in theaters. I didn't quite know how to take it, but I bought it.
Yep.
So I'd have it in my collection for getting ready for this show. It's a runner-up for me. Yeah. But I admire what it was trying to do. It's epic. I mean, it's another one like The Wailing, 2.5
Yeah, it's
hours.
a big movie.
Yeah.
And it's a big swing, and they ask a lot of their audience. And I respect that so much, because so much of the Hollywood movies that we get, just do all of the work for you. And sometimes you're in the mood for that. Sometimes you want something. Sometimes you want Piranha 3D, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't, if you want a meal, this is a meal. Yeah. It didn't make my list either, but I really liked it. Just for Verbinski coming back to the horror genre.
Yeah.
It sort of says like, he did the Ring remake, and that kind of bought his ticket into Hollywood. Yeah. But it wasn't just a gateway into horror. He definitely likes the genre.
Yeah.
And I think this movie was unfairly dismissed, but I also understand why it got missed too on some level. So it's a solid pick. I wish, like so many others, I could have found room for it on the list.
I also want to shout out like Dane DeHaan, who I think is really good in it as her lead, but also Mia Goth.
Yeah.
She goth me. Did you see what I did there?
You're a dad. You're allowed that.
Yeah, I know. I've become unfunny.
29.
The world's become unfunny. You're so funny. That's how it goes.
No. Even my wife is telling me that, like, you've got puns now.
For shame, sir.
Yeah, for shame.
29th position.
29th for me. This was a Shudder-produced French rape revenge movie called Revenge. Now, there have been lots of movies named Revenge, but 2017, Corelli Fargent is the director. And it's basically about this couple that are going on this really elaborate getaway weekend. And then the boyfriend's friends show up, and they're supposedly going on a hunting trip. But then it goes into like a really ugly scene. And then we go through a very vicious revenge cat and mouse type of thing. This isn't the only cat and mouse movie that we're talking about. It blew me away with its ambition, its violence. We've talked before about how French movies can have a certain edge. Their horror is breaking all the rules.
Yeah.
I feel like this is like what I Spit on Your Grave should be, a lot more. So it stayed with me. Initially, it was a bit lower on the list, but as I kept kind of reevaluating and adding more movies, it got farther and farther behind. But I'm not sure how many people have seen it, so I wanted to shout it out.
Well, you know, I am not big on rape in films, and
Yep.
rape revenge movies. I get they're like a sub genre of horror, and probably my least. I endorse your selection. Again, it's not on my list. It's not my type of movie.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna watch a rape revenge movie, this is the one. It's also got a female director behind it. I think that helps the perspective.
Yes.
The way the assault is not particularly focused and lingered on, but the
Yes.
revenge is more so. The over the top levels of blood and gore become a statement. Like
Yeah.
that entire house is wallpapered with gore. Nobody has that much blood in their body. It stretches credulity, but you accept everything you see in the movie. What do we usually get in a rape revenge film? A lot of gratuitous female nudity. What do we get
Yep.
in this film? A lot of gratuitous male
Male,
nudity. It's a really satisfying reversal while still existing as a revenge picture. It is what it is, but it's better than anything that came before it. Really, it should be on my list, but as I'm going to say again and again, it was a tough list
Yeah,
to
it
do.
is.
Yep.
I wanted to shout out Matilda Anna Ingrid Lutz is the lead in this, and I think she does a great job. And that setting is amazing. Like it's a beautiful setting that gets uglied up.
And they
Fast.
really do. The camera lingers on her, and she is highly sexual and flirtatious with these men, and nothing they do is okay. It's
No.
not like in another film you'd think they would be like, oh, she's leading them on, or they're like trying to set this up like she had made a mistake. No, these guys are fucking awful,
Yeah.
and they deserve everything that's happening to them. Sorry, did you have anything to say about
No,
Revenge?
no, I have not seen it, so
Oh, okay.
I was just going to sit there and go,
Again, not something just to throw on for shits and giggles.
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no.
In each group of 10, sort of the way I looked at it, and there's the bottom 10, the middle 10, and the top 10 of the decade.
Yeah.
I noticed things. Each group has a tie related to a director. Each group has a highly personal choice. And to my surprise, each group has a sci-fi horror.
Mm.
In 29th position, I give you Ex Machina
Yeah.
from Alex Garland.
Yeah.
I think a special mention can also go to Annihilation. I know Annihilation is based off of a novel, and that novel, I assume, is borrowing heavily from Color Out of Space, because it really does feel like a remake of H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. And that bear scene in Annihilation almost could have put it on the list, but we'll call it an honorable mention. Ex Machina is like the darkest episode of Twilight Zone you've ever seen.
Yep.
And even if you think you know where it's going, I think it's going there in a different way than
Yep.
you're going to anticipate.
Yep.
I didn't know. I didn't go with Men as much with the Alex
Yeah.
Garland's most recent one, but I have a degree of faith in him. Like this
Yes.
guy, he wrote 28 Days Later.
Yes.
He wrote Sunshine. He wrote Dread.
Yep.
And each one of his movies I really like, and they're totally different. Like I wouldn't have guessed that the dude who wrote 28 Days Later would also write Ex Machina. They seem, they're both genre movies, but they're far, far away from each other. And some people will say maybe it's not horror enough, but I would invite you to watch it again.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
horror.
It's very horror enough for
Oh,
me.
it's very scary.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is my first
It's
regret.
It's
Your first regret?
Yeah. It's unsettling. It did not make my list. I had thought about it. It's definitely unsettling. Unsettling.
I think it's lower on the list because you could make the debate
Yep.
about the genre.
Yep.
But it felt weird not having it on the list at the end of the time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
I really like that movie. It's not a feel-good number,
No.
but
No.
it is effective.
It's grown in my esteem as time has gone on too. It's a great pick. It's a great pick, and probably should be on my list. But too many movies. I mean, that's
And
the thing.
again, so many more to shout out. That's Scarlett Johansson, sci-fi
Under the
movie,
Skin.
Under the Skin.
Yep.
Like that could be there. Vivarium, Womb. There's so many great ones. And again,
Yep.
it's a tough old world.
Yep.
28, Mr. Beckmann.
So, if you hadn't heard of this filmmaker, I want to introduce you to the director. He's a British director called Peter Strickland. And he made a movie that I no words. it is described as a horror comedy. It definitely has more horror than in comedy. Although I can see why it does borrow a lot from Suspiria, because it's basically about a witch's cult in a department store. But it's a movie about a killer dress, a killer dress that like goes down the hall. And so whenever you see that, you can't help but giggle. But it walks this fine line from like utterly disturbing horror. Like each scene that follows each other, I just went, where's this story going? It doesn't need the narrative is still strong enough. It's essentially two stories about the dress that connect, much like another movie that is clearly homaging it with Lost Highway. But unlike Lost Highway, and I'll even steal your words, you don't need a roadmap with it.
Right.
It is like
It's called In Fabric.
Yeah, In Fabric.
You hadn't said it yet.
Sorry, yes. Number 28. It's In Fabric, and it's about a killer dress. And the first story is a lot stronger than the second, so much so that I think if they tacked on the climax of the second story and just tacked it on to the end of the first story, it might be a little bit shorter, but I think it would be even stronger and higher on this list. I want to shout out the cast as well. We have Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who first got started in Secrets and Lies.
She was Oscar nominated for that and then forgotten about.
She did TV acting a little bit.
Yeah.
She's really good.
Awesome.
She plays this single mom who is feeling more and more tension with her son at home. He's in his early 20s and just is just he's fucking around, and his girlfriend is kind of moved into the flat, and there's obviously tension there. And then she goes to this store, and there is this disturbing witches cult that. You grew up in Alberta, yes?
Yes.
I just have fond memories of the Bay in downtown Saskatoon and all that sort of 70s aesthetic. And there's even commercials for this department store that just feel like that Sears store in downtown Saskatoon, and that I visited with my mom in the late 70s and 80s. So the attention to detail, even with the aesthetic, I go, mwah. But this dress is just bizarre, along with the witches. I also do want to shout out Fatma Mohammed, who plays Miss Luckmore. Just the look she gives as one of the head witch and villains is just terrifying every time she speaks, and she's an amazing villain. Also, Gwendolyn Christie, who plays the girlfriend of the son, she's in it and she's quite good. I don't want to say much like that Killer Tire movie. Rubber.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that I've never seen a killer dress movie before.
It's an experience. And
Yes.
there are those types of movies that are just like, what is this?
Yeah.
And that is definitely my experience of In Fabric, but so much so that I didn't really seriously consider it for the list.
Yeah.
It's an experience, and an experience worth having, but
Yeah.
I couldn't say that I was horrified by it.
Yeah,
I couldn't
was.
even say that I laughed at it. I was kind of bewildered. I didn't regret my time with it,
Yeah.
but I was bewildered.
No.
Have you seen In Fabric?
I put it on my to-watch list. No, I
Not
I
the
haven't.
only film this decade that has killer clothes in it. There's one about a pair of killer jeans
Yep.
as well, apparently. I've not seen that one, but true story.
Yep.
Clothes will kill you.
What's your 28th selection?
28th is one of my selections for us to review, Blood Quantum. Maybe some people could argue a little bit too, should be a little bit higher on my list. Directed by Jeff Barnaby. We'll discuss it in more detail during the review,
sure.
so I don't want to say too much. I would say there were a couple acting performances and one character that maybe drew it back a little bit from being a little bit higher on my list, but a terrific Canadian produced film that every horror fan should check out if they haven't.
You will find with me, especially if it's a low budget movie, especially if it's a Canadian movie, and especially if it's a zombie movie, I'm going to give you a lot of rope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some weak performances in the movie, but I think they make up for that with the level of gore that they go for.
Yeah, and they go
uh,
for it.
by managing not to get bogged down by their own concept, which I think a weaker director might have done. But you're right, to be continued. Is there anything you want to say about Blood Quantum before we...
No.
We will be reviewing it.
Yes. Yeah. We'll save it then.
So how long were you out there for?
I lost track of the time.
Did you get bit?
This planet we're on is so sick of our shit. That's why the dead keep coming back to life.
You're immune. I'm not. What if my baby isn't either?
It's bad. Ninagasi. I heard that you could cure bites here.
Ain't nobody immune here but us.
One of them could come in here and infect this entire camp.
Behind you.
You want to live?
If there's a movie that we're reviewing out of this bunch that isn't on the list that probably should be for me, it's Blood Quantum. I called it out earlier on when we were doing our introduction. But I do have a lot of respect for it, and I think it's been well covered on my podcast that I do like zombie movies, and I do support Canadian filmmakers.
Yep.
And we're talking about the movie on this episode dedicated to the best of the decade. So I hope this is an okay consolation prize. I'm glad that you guys found room for it. I really like taking the Indigenous community, bringing them to center stage, something that's been long overdue, especially in Canadian cinema. Usually when we get it, they're sort of like feel-good dramedies or like slice of life. But why not do a genre movie, you know? Like, why not do a thriller? Why not do anything other than, isn't the Indigenous communities swell? Was basically the ultimate thesis of all Native-themed movies in Canada, it felt like, for the longest time.
Yep.
Here we have a balls-out, vicious, bloody zombie movie, high concept, politically charged, but that's not too up its own ass to forget that we need to have good characters, we need to have good gore, and it needs to be entertaining and not a lecture. And it succeeds on all of those fronts. Anything that it stumbles on is the kind of thing that any low-budget filmmaker is going to stumble over. Not all the performances are 100%. I do think there's some rocky spots in the screenplay, but it holds together enough that I am a big, big supporter of it. I really wish that the main character was not named Turd Lord or Turd Master.
Lysol or no?
Lysol's the
He's
villain.
No, but the kid who was shitting off the bridge at the beginning is sort of, and he's going to be a new father anyway.
Joseph?
Yeah, but his nickname was the Turd, or whatever. And Trailer, they all had these kind of movie names.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That might be a little bit of res humor. I don't know.
Maybe I could plead ignorance on it.
Me too.
But they all had these handles that felt like video game characters, or just sort of chipped a little bit away at the reality that they were trying to present for me. There's a scene where they have to deal with the zombies and they're collecting stuff, and the guy runs down with everybody who's going to do what and what they're going to do, like they haven't been doing this for 9 months. It's completely for the audience.
Yeah, I caught that this last time. Yeah,
I understand that, but they wouldn't have that conversation. Yeah. There's little things like, and I'm just pointing out quibbles.
But I think there's some different, there's some dynamic happening at that point where there were more people coming into the community, and they were trying to revisit their plan. That's my excuse, because I was like, oh, I didn't notice this exposition dump the first time I saw it. But then I was like, no, there's a different dynamic happening there, and a bit of intensity from the moment that the guy brings in his daughter and the other character.
Yeah. Well, and there's a time jump, and I like that when the original sort of zombie ground zero happens, a couple of our characters get bit before we understand, and the movie establishes that they're immune. When Trailer originally finds out that he's bit, he's like, well, fuck, what am I going to do with my last few hours here? How can I protect and serve while at it? But then we jump forward, and what I kind of thought and maybe feared that the movie was going to be about was going to be this conflict between infected whitey, you know, and now the white man is going to represent somehow the quote-unquote wild Indians, and that's not what they do with it. They go much smarter with it. When the refugees coming to the native community begging for help,
Yes.
what will the answer be?
Yep.
And instead of it just being, well, let's wholesale slaughter these guys, which I thought that was going to be, and sort of like almost the understood, A, it's protecting your community, and B, we've been oppressed by them since they got here, since the boats arrived.
Yeah.
So sucks to be your turn. I'm not, well, why endanger a functioning, safe community by even letting potential zombies in? Even if they're not bit, sooner or later they're going to die. It's taking on a very serious problem. And there's only a handful, at least initially, of the characters that go bad. But when they go bad, they go super ridiculously on the verge of too bad, too far.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a criticism I have,
The turn of Lysol just seemed a little bit out of left field, a little bit.
And
But
again, kill the
drug
white...
and alcohol induced, though.
Sure.
I think.
Sure.
And that elevates the anger. So I can come up with excuses, but I do feel like
They
that
pushed it a little
character
too
is maybe a screenplay criticism could be what happens to him. But
And I understand him being resentful of the white refugees, and I understand him wanting to punish people, but stabbing his brother.
that was
point
so.
No.
It
No.
just seemed out of. I mean, I get
no.
that this is viewed as the good son or something like
Right.
that, and there could be
And
some
there's built-in
jealousy,
resentment
but
that's been there forever, and I get
and
that.
elevated by being the level of intoxication at the time.
But he goes full supervillain a little faster
Yeah.
than I was comfortable with.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
again, I'm kind of getting the negative stuff out of the way because I
Yeah.
am going to be very positive
Yeah.
about the movie.
Yeah.
But I think the clever thing about it, although they went a little bit too far with his evil, is he was proven right. They should not have let those refugees in.
Yep.
The one had lied that she was bit and is the person that bites him and effectively destroys his manhood and, triggers the rest of the movie. But again, in true zombie fashion, the real villain kind of becomes him and his squad of extremists, and the zombies are just obstacles. So other than those things, and I've made more of a meal of them than I meant to, this is a completely wall-to-wall, action-packed, and gory zombie movies. Increasingly these days, a lot of zombie movies are forgetting the gore. And I don't think you can accuse
No,
this
there's
movie
lots of gore
of
here.
forgetting the gore. So I'm a big fan. So I said all the negative stuff. You guys can say all the positive, okay?
Well, I'm going to start with Michael Grey Eyes, who plays our cop protagonist.
Trailer.
Yeah, he's actually been quite busy. I mean, he was in that terrible Firestarter movie.
I haven't seen
I
that
knew
yet.
I'd seen him somewhere, but I didn't put that together.
Oh God, he's been in a whole bunch of other things. Anyways, him and I think the Doctor?
I don't know.
His sort of pseudo love
Oh,
interest.
yeah, his love interest? Okay. They've been coming up?
That was his ex, wasn't it?
Right.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, she's good. I liked her. Yeah.
I think I think you sort of tapped on it. There's some kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? Hard to believe little moments that could sort of dampen the film. Always good to see Gary Farmer, though. By the way,
Oh, he's good. Towards the end.
Always good
Man.
to see it.
yep.
Oh. He's got.
I do love
so
like
cool.
the little animation bits that sort of also bookend the film as well.
Did you like that? Yeah.
I thought that was a nice touch. And it is a giant love letter to the Romero zombie films that we both grew up on.
Well, it's a zombie movie with its own distinct identity.
Yep.
Which by itself is a harder thing to do these days.
Yep.
So, and yeah, it's such a good concept that it's one of those things like I'm surprised it hasn't come up already.
Yep.
Like,
I also, on this recent watch, I picked up on, oddly enough, the influence of Tarantino is in here. There's a rather elaborate and disgusting monologue about giving head to a woman, and then we actually see like he's covered in blood, and the police, And then like the response is that's some repugnant shit. That's the most repugnant shit. It was like, it sounded like Samuel L. Jackson when a line that Tarantino would give him. We actually have like Zed's dead is
the movie
said in there, and I do think that mix of the animation was a little bit of a Kill Bill type of quasi homage. It was done differently than like having like a full on anime sequence like in Kill Bill, but I don't know. I didn't pick up on any Tarantino influence there until this recent viewing. I just think it's just a solid idea. That first half an hour is a great movie unto itself.
Yeah.
I mean, when they're trying to figure out everything and the action and they bring the blood in that sequence, and they establish the characters in such a smart way. I suppose I could criticize like the fish effects look a little bit wonky, but again,
I like the
independent
concept of it though.
Yeah.
Like
it came from the
caribou and certain animals weren't affected, but you can't eat fish anymore. They're off the menu.
I have a question for if one of you can kind of figure this one out for me. Like, it's established it's set in the 1980s.
Yep.
Why is it set in the 80s? Is there a comment on environmental impact, or like I wasn't sure why it and what was it that seemed very 80s?
Usually if it's set in the 80s, it's because of the classic horror movie convenience. Not everybody has cell phones, and it's much easier to isolate them, but they're already isolated. That's sort of the point.
Yeah.
They have a safe haven. How are they going to maintain it?
I thought there'd be some sort of a payoff to that, or there'd be something that'd be more overtly 80s. And there, I guess, a couple of the characters, the one who causes a lot of damage sneaks in there, has a kind of a bit of an 80s look about her, but I really didn't get why that was in there.
I'd kind of forgotten until you mentioned it,
Yeah,
to be honest.
I forgot after the first time I saw it, but then I was like, okay, but yeah, when it says all these months later, we're still in the 80s here. We haven't jumped years ahead, so I just didn't completely get that. But the samurai sword stuff, man, that was cool.
And bloody.
Oh, cool. And bloody, and I'm never leaving this. I mean, what a great moment. I mean, like, is there anybody badder than that character? Like, cooler and badder than, what a way to go. But and all the stuff surrounding, like, again, I praised another actor who was in a tough situation and is pregnant and giving birth.
Yeah.
Similar type of thing here. But, wow, like, devastating stuff that happens.
When we lose characters, it matters in this movie.
Yeah,
and they're not afraid.
I was shocked to see the sheriff character go, to be perfectly honest.
It was like, we still have this much time left in the movie, and we've kind of lost arguably our main character.
Certainly who we liked the most, who I liked the most.
All the rules are out the door, like that other movie I talked about on my list that I praised heavily.
Yeah.
And I think this is one I will go back to several times. I mean, I kind of think it should be a mainstream horror classic. I'd like to hear some of like the American podcasters talking about this one a little bit more. And I know it was at the Toronto International Film Festival was where it got most of its attention. I don't know if it got kind of south of the border and beyond, but it probably should. And
it's tragic, but the fact that the director has passed away might help its legacy. Yeah. I mean, that sucks to say out loud, but I do think it's a fact.
Like, what could have been,
Do you think all the colonialism allegory stuff is laid on too thick?
No,
not at all.
I was worried that it was going to be. That was my worry going into it.
It all seemed very plausible within the confines of the story.
Yeah. No, it doesn't really, pander to, like, light guilt. It's not like... It wants to entertain you.
Yes.
And it does.
Like, I think it could almost be a double with Get Out. I mean, in that way, where it entertains you. It has this greater message, but it's no matter which way you take it, you're going to be entertained by this film.
And this is much more of a teeth and tissue horror movie.
It is, yes.
Than Get Out. But Get Out made it to my list, unfortunately. Again, I don't feel good about this not being on my list, but here it is.
It's the most scared I've been. That look you just gave me was like, you're going to punch me because I wasn't on your list.
I mean, it made my list for a reason. I think it's an amazing zombie film.
Yeah. It's good enough.
Good enough.
28th position for me, I'd said I almost put Piranha Double D, or not Double D, sorry, Piranha 3D as my guilty pleasure. And I felt shame or guilt that I didn't include Aja's The Hills Have Eyes in the previous decade one we talked about. Because I do really think that remake overperformed for me. But I'm giving Crawl 28th position.
We will be talking about Crawl later.
I understand that it is not a smart movie. I understand that if you knew anything biologically about these animals, that you would just be running from the theater.
Yeah.
I understand that Barry Pepper walks on a severely broken leg and that it's completely stupid. But I have a fucking blast.
Yep.
Every time I watch Crawl.
Yep.
And if it's another one of those titles, if someone's visiting and it's like, you haven't seen Crawl? Seriously?
Yep.
Let's watch Crawl. It's 85 minutes of your life, and it's completely worth your time.
Oh, yes.
And I also have a soft spot for these, when animals attack movies.
Yep.
And really, the strange strength of the movie is that it's not the character arcs or the, the sort of personal wins that really are the highlights of the movie. The silliest, goofiest scenes in the movie are the highlights of the movie.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
The dumber it gets, the bigger my smile goes.
Yep.
And it's not a guilty pleasure.
Yep.
Why? Because I think it's an incredibly difficult movie to make.
Yep.
And I think that it was firing on all cylinders, and and part of me wants it to be deeper in the list, but 28th position it is.
Yep.
Crawl.
I think it was also wise that it did not kill the dog. They set it up there. They set it up there, and they set it up there. Set it up there, excuse me. And I was waiting, and I was so happy when the climax was over. Yay, the dog!
Reverse trolling. It was great.
Yeah, no. So we will be talking about Crawl later.
Okay.
Yes, we will.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I thought I might have been alone on that one.
No,
you are not alone.
It's up there for sentimental value, but I loved technically everything about Crawl. Even when the policemen get turned in a spiral and attack. That's the attention to detail there. It's ridiculous.
There's a scene in that movie where a crocodile smashes through a wooden staircase.
Yep.
And then there's a scene a little while later where a crocodile cannot get through a glass shower door.
Yep.
It's confoundingly silly, but I love it.
In no way is Barry Pepper walking out of that movie either in real life. It's his femurs, man. His femurs.
It's just a little bit broken.
Yeah, but me lovey.
All right. Beckmann's turn, number 27th.
So number 27th was probably, I don't know if it was the best, but one of the best cinematic experiences that I saw with a crowd. This movie is so much fun, and it made me laugh out loud a couple of times. And that is Cabin in the Woods by Drew Goddard. Yeah. That movie is a lot of fun. Shout out to Chris Hemsworth, who dies gloriously. And you knew it was coming. Yep. But I still went, Mah! And but honestly, the best part of that movie, where I'm going to give it to Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins.
Oh, yeah.
You never go wrong with Richard Jenkins.
Yeah, Richard Jenkins is, if you can have him in your movie.
Yeah,
do it.
But the fact of taking Office Bets, mwah, Bella. And I do love the meta horror in it, and I love the ending of that movie and what it's really saying. I think even though Joss Whedon has been sort of outcasted by Hollywood, whatever. But I love me some Drew Goddard.
Do not take Cabin in the Woods away from Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
I know Drew Goddard definitely had his hand. He directed it and co-wrote it. But we're not allowed to like Joss Whedon anymore, but we can respect that the man could write a hell of a screenplay.
Yeah, but every single time Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins are on the movie, I have a big old smile on my face.
I am a big supporter of that particular picture.
When you first invited me to be on this show, I thought guaranteed it's going to be on my top 30 list, and then I watched more and more and more, and then it slowly drifted away. So a big runner-up. I don't know. This might be one where the next time I watch him, why didn't I put it in? But all the things you said are absolutely true. I love it. I love how it kind of changed some things for the horror genre. I know some people who don't like it. They don't like meta anything with their horror, and
the 90s kind of
But-
spoiled the meal for meta for a lot of hardcore horror fans, because
Yeah.
as much as Scream revitalized interest in horror, it kind of took a lot of the horror out of the genre a little bit. It became more fun, it became more winky, and it made it less scary. I think a balance can be struck, and I think that Cabin in the Woods
This is a good
strikes that
balance.
balance
It is a
pretty
good balance,
perfectly.
yeah.
And completely abandoned by the studio that made the movie.
Yeah, they
Like,
didn't know what they had at all.
Yeah, no, and
no,
it's
it was a
a
spring
shame.
release or something like that, and it became.
Well, they sat on it for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 2011 release, but I believe it was filmed in 2009.
Was it also a victim of the writer's strike, or?
I can't remember.
Yeah, that was so long ago. I don't know, but yeah.
But there you go, Cabin in the Woods.
Bring it.
Yeah, my number 27 is Under the Shadow. Thank you for introducing that one to me, Beckmann. So we'll discuss it again during the review. And I spent the first little while thinking, like, this is more of like a drama, but the horror creeps in. The other thing I say, and I may repeat it when we review it, is I kind of feel like, because I'd watched these around the same time, that this is what Evil Dead Rises should be. Apartment complex, you've got a demon, but the restraint of this filmmaker, and I guess it was I mean, it's serious and tragic, but I had more fun watching it than I did with Evil Dead Rises. It's a weird comparison, but I kept thinking of the two of them.
They're similar in setting, but I think that's
they're different in style.
Everywhere else, I would say they're
but
different.
I much prefer this to that.
Right.
But we've talked about this before, that kind of the switch out of the Bruce Campbell Evil Dead movies has been a tough adjustment for me. So, but anyway, yeah, talking more about Under the Shadow. Thank you. And, you know, another non-English language horror movie, which is very impactful. I mean, I was thinking about it for days afterwards. It had to be on the list. Again, I put some other ones ahead that, again, you might argue later on, well, some that stretch the definition of horror are ahead of it. But, you know, I think if we had a top drama list as well, this could make that list too, because it's just a solid film all around.
Well, we will get to Under the Shadow. We'll do a full-length review of that one. So let's press on. In 27th position for myself, of course, found footage was going to be represented, and there is plenty of found footage to choose from. But also here, I'm going to talk about anthologies. And an anthology series that really came to the top of people's attention this decade was the VHS series. In particular here, I'm shouting out VHS 2. I guess an honorable mention to the other VHS movies, but in a way, I think it utilizes found footage in its best possible way. I think a short 15 minutes to half an hour horror film and found footage can be absolutely great. And the VHS franchise locked into that and has had increasingly positive success with it. I think VHS Viral has been the weakest by far, but VHS 1 and 2 is very much worth your time in visiting. Since I'm also talking about anthologies, I also want to shout out two other anthologies that I couldn't find room for on the list, but that I like a lot. Canadian-made Christmas Horror Story. Sounds like it would be a waste of your time. Completely worthy Christmas horror movie watch. And another one produced, I believe, by Larry Fessenden and using him as a voice performer called Southbound. It's another very solid
I've heard about
anthology
Southbound,
movie, but I'm going to give it to VHS 2. And I think, like, VHS might have cracked the code on found footage. There has been other great found footage movies this decade, and I will talk about some of them. But, yeah, if you like it, you should definitely seek out any VHS movie, really.
Yeah, VH2 is one of those rare anthology movies where I don't think there's a bad story in the bunch. They are all terrifying. That alien one at the end, the first time I saw it, holy mother of God. And that is
the director of Hobo with a Shotgun, Canadian director.
And then there's the one from the director of The Raid.
Gareth Evans.
His one about the cult. Just wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of butt puckering moments in that particular picture. Have you seen VHS 2?
Whew. Yeah, here's my problem.
Uh-oh.
It's not with VHS 2. I am not using the word hated, greatly disliked VHS
Right.
to the point where I wasn't sure I wanted to go on this journey.
Yeah.
I had sort of heard that 2 was the best.
It's the stronger one.
But and that's maybe where I should have gone. The first VHS, which and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I only liked one story. That was the one done by Ty West.
Oh wow!
Everything else I could have done without.
And that was one of my least favorites.
And that was your least favorite. We've
yeah.
talked about how we have very different tastes.
Yeah.
I could not stand the characters.
There is
that I
a
was seeing,
weird theme of sexism, and
Yes.
it wasn't done intentionally because all the films were made separately. But yeah, the sexist sort of ugly undercurrent theme, and the fact that it's over 2 hours long of constant shaky camera, wears a lot of people out. VHS 2, I think, is like 96 minutes.
Yep.
And the stories are much more distinct. They don't have this theme of awfulness through them. I mean, other than their
maybe
horror stories.
VHS 2 will change my mind on this, but I was like, am I going to go through and watch all of these if the first one was such a lousy experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if
and
it's
one
not
of the
for you-
directors, well, a couple of the folks connected to this appear on my list with other movies later on. So I'm not giving up on the directors or anything like this, but I just like.
Part of me
your
wishes
lead-in has to be. I don't know. I have to.
If there
side
were a
with somebody.
series of web shorts that you could just watch one at a time, they would almost be more effective. Like, cumulatively, it gets to be a lot. Between the screaming and the shaking and being reintroduced, having to restart the story every 20 minutes. Like, there is something to be said for that wearing people out. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think that VHS 2 is the best that the franchise has come to so far. So if VHS 2 doesn't work for you, then definitely
that
stop
Halloween
on it.
Haunted House one almost worked for me, but then it became kind of again. I was just like I could not. The characters that would set up all of these stories, I just had no time for. These are the opposite of people I want to be around, and so then I'm, forced to be with them for a couple hours. So I don't know if that improves with VHS 2 or not, but
So, full confession, as I was looking at my list and going, all right, I have to start cutting.
Yeah.
I have to start cutting. VH2 was one of the movies where I looked at, and like I had, before I locked in my list, I had 5 films, in my hand going, okay, am I going to disclose, have this film not on the list? And it hurts so much because I agree with you, like that movie is 90-some minutes of terror. And I just go, it's in my honorable mentions, spoilers, because it deserves to be here. I just, once again, this list came from my gut and my heart, but I completely understand, and I feel shame.
No worries, brother. 26th position. Let's
All
keep
right.
this truck moving.
So at 26, I want to talk about this filmmaker named Adam Wingard. He made this way better than it should have been Blair Witch movie, which, yes, has its flaws, and way better than it should have been fun Godzilla versus King Kong.
Yeah.
But I love and even though it's not on the list, his tribute to 90s kind of thriller horror, The Guest, which is just a bizarre movie. But
Not quite genre enough for me. But
yeah. But I dug what it was going for. But I want to talk about, because I love me some slashers. And in this decade, he gave us You're Next, which is just a whole lot of fun. Yeah. It's bloody, it's violent, it's got an amazing cast. It was a good time. I love me You're Next. Adam Wingard is, I think, a filmmaker that we still should keep an eye on.
Yep.
I think he's doing good stuff. He's doing good stuff.
yeah, you will hear about Your Next later on.
Your Next is going to be on all 3 of our lists.
Oh,
then.
good.
It's a tough one. It is a horror comedy. I think there is enough funny in it that you could call it a comedy.
Yeah.
But the horror is still so strong in that movie.
It's juicy.
Yeah, it doesn't let you relax ever, and I respect that about it, especially with horror comedies.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just eventually the movie becomes one thing or the other.
Yeah.
That's really the powerful thing about Scream.
Yeah.
That it maintains both for the entire run.
This is the movie that made me just kind of shake my head at Ready or Not. This is the film that I wanted, Ready or Not. Or is it Ready or Not? Yeah.
They're essentially the same movie.
Yeah,
but Your
similar,
Next is
yeah.
better. Yeah.
But this came out way earlier and has Shout out to Ty West, by the way, who plays Tariq.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, dude.
Yeah.
But I love the lead as well.
Larry Fessenden's in it as
yes,
well.
yes.
One of the
Barbara,
first kills.
Barbara Crampton is in it.
Yes.
I'm trying to find
The Australian actress from Bait. I can't think of her name.
I want to say it's Sharni Vincent.
Oh,
Sharni, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
She's really good, and I'm surprised she hasn't made bigger movies, but she's also amazing in it. So
I think she steals the movie for me.
You're next.
Yeah, great time at the movies.
Yeah, it really is.
26?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm going with, and this is one I probably wouldn't have come across if it wasn't for listening to your reviews on Rank and Review. Pie Wacket.
Oh, nice.
Directed by Adam McDonald. Absolutely brilliant movie about, I work with teenage girls, and they do get mad at their moms.
Irrational teenage hatred.
Yeah, and can get very connected to the occult stuff and make that part of their identity. And you're calling on a witch to kill your mother is probably not the best thing, as this girl discovers.
Yeah.
It is, the beginning to end, it was just a terrific. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just a solid horror movie, I would say, for those seeking out still fairly independent horror movies. It is Canadian, is it, or did I just? It's
I believe it is. The director did another movie called Backcountry.
Yeah.
About a bear attack.
I thought I saw something in the credits there about.
He's made both
Canada.
movies in Canada. I guess I don't know.
I think it's supposed to be set in upstate New York,
Right.
or something like that. Laurie Holden from The Walking Dead does a great job as the mother as well. But we get the girl's name, Nicole Muniz.
Yeah.
She really carries the film well, and so
there's nothing wrong with that selection.
Nope, not
it's
at all.
definitely like one of these curse movies where someone feels like corralled into the most horrific possible ending that we can come up with.
Yeah.
But I do really like the movie, and in any other decade it would be on the list.
Yeah.
Yep.
like again, this is going to happen over and over again. Really like that movie. No problem with that pick at all. It just didn't make my list.
Yeah.
It just didn't quite make my list.
And I love the paranoia in the middle towards the third act of the film. It was
The mother-daughter thing, that when a mom and a teenage daughter really start getting at each other, it can become so ugly.
Yeah.
So ugly.
Yeah.
And
Really?
movies have tapped into that
Yeah.
as well as Piowacket.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it feels like it should be on my list. It just isn't somehow.
Yep.
You have
Too
any
many
thoughts on
movies.
Piowacket?
Loved it. I love The Witch. I love the performances. It's not on my list, but once again, I am so not wagging my finger. I just sort of I hang my head in shame.
Well, maybe one of the reasons that Piowacket isn't on my list is because, as I said, each group has an incredibly personal choice.
Yeah.
You talk about discoveries for the podcasts. I find a cheap horror movie. I think, hey, I'll give it a try. I would like to talk about We Are Still Here. From Ted Gagan, I believe is his name.
Yep.
And it's also produced by Dark Sky Films, Larry Fessenden's distribution company. And Larry Fessenden has like a major supporting role. Not one of his cameo roles, but it's a major supporting role. And what I so love about this little celebrated ghost movie is it starts with the patient vibe of a ghost movie like The Changeling or The Innkeepers, where it's like these people are dealing with the loss, they think there's a haunting, and we're going to just hit you with atmosphere, we're going to hit you with melancholy. And it starts off being that movie. And it ends Evil Dead 2. It goes so fucking crazy and so hard in a way that you are not anticipating in the third act that it really, like, for some people breaks the movie. Like, it feels like a From Dusk Till Dawn type of like thing where it was like, I was liking this sort of slow burn that we were having, and now there's a chick with 6 steak knives in her throat. Like, it's like there's a holy shit factor to the movie that really makes it memorable. And I don't know why, I just keep coming back to it. I'll be often feeling like I want something quick to watch. This is another one of these 80 minutes quick and dirty horror movies, gets it done. And it's not perfect, but it just hits me in this sweet spot. It gives me the feels. It feels in a way like the type of movie that if I could I would have made. Like, I get the idea of the writer-director sitting back with the house of audience and watching people first squirm and then suddenly be, like, completely shocked at how crazy the movie gets, where the joy of the story is the reaction that you're going to get out of your audience. And I don't know, it just never left me. And maybe maybe this is the spot where Payawakit should be, but it's not going to be on neither of your guys' lists.
But I enjoy it.
It's on mine, damn it.
Yeah.
It's on my to watch. So,
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Larry showed it to me, and I understand why it's here.
Yeah.
It's not on my list, but yes. So at number 25, I have a tie. And I want to talk about this filmmaker that...
You got 2 ties in us already.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this director that you actually introduced me to with Troll Hunter, but that is a Andre Overdahl.
Yeah.
I love me some like preteen PG-13 horror. That's how I sort of brought in into the horror genre to begin with. And it's the kind of film that like Amblin, Spielberg almost would make, and also it's an amazing anthology store, and yet they're all tied to the overall narrative as well.
Scary stories.
Scary stories to tell in the dark. Anytime you've got Guillermo del Toro's thumb of approval, who I do believe produced this movie.
You can tell because of the monsters.
Yeah, the monsters are amazing. They are amazing. Like with each story, the monsters get better and better. I haven't showed Maya this movie yet. I want to, but that movie, I went, yeah, when I saw it.
Are you pairing it with Troll Hunter?
No, not Troll Hunter. The Autopsy of Jane Doe.
Yeah.
I would love to see this almost as a play. It's a great two-hander. I know the girlfriend's in there as well, and there are other characters. Shout out to the actor who plays the witch as well. She has a tough role.
That's not a special effect. They had an actress on the table.
Yeah. She's great.
Credited as Jane Doe.
I love how the mystery just unravels, and just the attention to detail of the job that these 2 actors are doing.
Overdahl is an MVP for me for the decade.
Yeah.
I really wanted to put Troll Hunter on this list, but I just couldn't find room for it.
Yeah.
I love Troll Hunter, but it's
I love it too.
I
love it too. And look, it was one of those films that went on and off and on and off, and I went, I'm going to put Scary Stories because that hospital sequence with that woman
just wants a hug.
Just wants a hug.
A white lady who wants a hug.
Holy shit! Like just holy shit.
Just give her a hug, man.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fine.
Yeah. So
Jason doesn't look as happy about this selection.
Well, I didn't have time to give it another day in court. I watched Scary Stories on a plane.
Right.
And I
really
did not.
Wrong way to see it.
Wrong way to see it completely. I recognize that now, but I didn't care for it much. I mean, I can't remember really liking the stories or but I will give it another day in court. But I just didn't get around to watching it for a reassessment because I have some reassessments that made the list here. But the Autopsy of Jane Doe we will be talking about.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. It's me Reiki.
Solid choice, brother.
Okay,
in 25th position, sir.
25th position. This is one of the big ones, and it might be on one or both of your lists, but I have it up at 25. Fede Alvarez's Don't Breathe. First time I watched it, I think I almost had a similar thing, not to the level of VHS, but I actually had to return to it to watch it again, because again, we're Michigan and Detroit, Michigan. It's kind of become an interesting setting for horror movies recently.
It's
certainly with Barbarian.
Late stage capitalism manifest physically is Detroit now.
Yeah, that's it. And I just couldn't stand these characters, and they're going to break into the home of a blind veteran, and it turns out he is way, way, way more horrible than they are. But I was having trouble, like, who am I supposed to like? But the last time I watched it, I was like, I just completely just appreciate all of the amazing stuff going on. Great filmmaking, the photography. Stephen Lang, who I have not been a fan of with the Avatar movies, because he's half a dimension of a character in that. He's given a lot to do here. I even like the bizarre sequel where suddenly we're supposed to like this
I
horrible
can't
man.
go for you that far, but
I won't go that far, but
Don't
I
Breathe.
was entertained by the sequel, but Don't Breathe is superior, and it kind of had to be on the list, so it's number 25 for me.
We will be talking about Fede Alvarez. Again, I just drew the line. This is more of a thriller. It's so scary while you're watching it. It feels like a horror movie, but it's a home invasion thriller. I could have maybe paired it with another Fede Alvarez film, but it didn't make the list. But there's a lot of great thrillers this decade. Did you see Green Room? Bone Tomahawk, Kill List. There's all of these movies that are terrifying, but they weren't sold as horror movies. So I will not fight that. That was on my list for a long time, but I justified taking it off for whatever reason.
We will be talking about Don't Breathe.
I figured it would be on somebody's list besides mine.
In 25th position for me, this is arguably the most mainstream selection that might even surprise you guys that it's on my list. I wouldn't be surprised if Conjuring shows up in one of your guys' list. I figured the Conjuring universe doesn't need my help at this point. The Insidious universe doesn't need my help at this point. But as far as those quiet boo movies that were released en masse, the one that works for me is Sinister, from Scott Derrickson, starring Ethan Hawke. And again, like, it shouldn't work. There's a sort of formula to this type of picture, which is definitely followed, but the elements of the rickety Super 8 found footage and the darkness of the house and how strangely frightening I found the movie. When I reviewed the movie on the podcast, I believe I ended up ranking Mama ahead of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think if I was making that rank today, I would stick by that. I think that Sinister has hung around for some reason with me. And I like Scott Derrickson. We talked about, he went on to Doctor Strange, and Scott Derrickson, and he's gone on to bigger, better things, but I'm a big fan of Sinister. The sequel was somewhat lackluster. I think because the mythology of the story was so complete, it didn't maybe lend itself well to franchising. I think it works better as a standalone piece. And the image of the boogeyman is very much what you would expect an industry stamped boogeyman to look like. But I don't know. The movie either works or it doesn't, and this one worked for me.
I didn't make my list. I almost wish I could have had kind of like a Don't Breathe reevaluation of it. I saw it in theaters. I remember admiring the filmmaking, the sound design in particular.
Right.
But it didn't work for me completely back then. I wonder if it worked for me better now. Right. So a reevaluation will happen, but it didn't make my list. So, yeah.
All right, sorry.
We will be talking about Sinister.
Oh, okay, so make your list. All right.
I agree with everything you said.
Good deal. 24th position, Mr. Beckmann.
So we've talked about Peter Strickland before.
And we're doing it again.
And we're doing it again because I just thought he made two great horror films. And that is, I hope I say this correctly because I've tried, I've flubbed it a couple of times. Barbarian Sound Studio. I love horror movies about haunted movies. Cigarette Burns is another one that comes to mind. I also love, movies about sound engineers. Big fan of Brian De Palma's Blowout. But just the general mood and the slow burn of it. The fact that he is driven insane by, and it definitely
What's the central actor, Toby Jones?
Yes.
Is it Toby Jones?
Yeah, it is Toby Jones. It is Toby Jones. He's really good in it. Everyone's really good. I just love the color palette of that movie. It's a nightmarish fever dream of a film, which I'm also a sucker for. I know the ending could be kind of... He's absorbed by the film, if I'm not mistaken.
There were so many movies this decade about psychological decay.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're really looking at in this one. But I think, like so many of them, it's open for interpretation.
Yeah.
He is hired to do a sound mix for a movie, which he doesn't realize is a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's clearly one of these old giallo films. And the film is so steeped in late 60s, 70s giallo vibe that it almost belongs more to that decade than to this one. And that was my excuse for leaving it off the list. But that central performance is super good. And the whole business of the Foley artist, how you get that bone snapping sound. And we don't often see what he's looking at, but we see him making these sound effects. And we see it getting to him.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, you can say that the film corrupted him, or you can just say that he went fucking crazy, or there are many avenues to take.
Yeah.
It's again a very solid pick.
I love Toby Jones, and this sounds great, but I haven't seen it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, put it on the list for sure, because I think
put it
that
on.
is definitely one that you would find interesting. If you like movies, it's about making movies.
I think I like them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
that's come across to me.
I'm a sucker for them as well. So.
My number 24. This is a Canadian independent movie that's very difficult to get your hands on, but it's a Book of Trespasses. For me, it's number 24. It needs to be on my list. I've watched it twice. I watched 2 cuts of it. The early cut blew me away, and I love every part of it. It is a subjective thing because I am talking to the director and actor and writer here, and I know Matt Burgess, and I know Josh Beaudry and Liz Nepchuk, and this is sometimes I've mentioned this on your show when we're talking about a movie and I'm being really hard on it, and I'm saying, okay, how is it that we don't criticize the acting in some of the horror movies when you made a micro budget horror movie and the acting is A+, and the story is A+, and I just personally I loved it. I mean, the stuff that we talked about, there were things that I really loved that I knew was going to be cut later on. Your sequence at the beginning, that scene there with Kevin. I mean, it's beautiful. So anyway, I just wanted to put it on here. I didn't know where it was going to fit in the list here, but
well, I'm not
for
going
me,
to suck
it's
my
number
own
24.
dick talking about Book of Trespasses, but it's off the list because you can't get a physical copy of it because we've never found a home for it.
I didn't have that rule for myself. I didn't allow ties, though. That was the other thing.
That is incredibly
ties,
sweet of you, Jason.
I'm not crying. You're crying. That's what I'm saying.
And Lee, you're making a cameo appearance.
Yes, because I drool well.
I can't talk rationally about it.
Yeah.
It's a lot to put your heart and back and soul into something and get nothing back in return.
Well, and I saw the years you put into it, so I want to publicly shout that out as well as
that is very kind of you, Jason. Yeah. I don't think it cracks the best of the decade, for the record. But
well,
I think
for
that's
me,
very
it did.
kind.
It's a subjective thing.
You're sweet, like sugar.
I am not ashamed of that movie. I am not. I don't even exactly regret it. I just wish people could watch it. Is that too much to ask?
Well, and I'd love to have a physical copy of it. Yeah.
همه دارن جمع میکنن شهر میرن
ما هم باید جمع کنیم بریم.
نه نمیشه. کسی برش داشته.
کی برش داشته؟ هیچ کی برش نداشته. جز من و تو هم هیچ کی توی این خونه نیست.
از شرشون در امان نیستیم.
چون که اونا دارن میان.
I loved Under the Shadow. I mean, I think I pointed it out to you. I remember after I watched it, I think I talked to you about it. I said, yeah, make time for it. It's a very solid movie. There's lots of good things to be said about it. I do parallel it a little bit with The Babadook this decade in that it's got this really strong mother-child relationship, and they get isolated on the precipice of a tragedy, and they have to defend themselves from a supernatural entity, which is largely a metaphor for perhaps something else. I think loneliness, again, is a big component here. But what I love about the, quote, escalation of the movie is that it's a slow taking away of things. Originally, when we meet our character, she's got her husband with her, and she's got this community around her. And even though it's wartime and the city's regularly being hit with bombs, like, everybody knows where to go. There's a alarm that sounds, and we get to see the routine. And every time this routine repeats itself, there are fewer people, and there's bigger empty spaces in the apartment.
Yep.
And they start it pretty low, and this is a true thing about apartment buildings. I remember my grandparents lived in a high-rise when I was a kid, and I would run around being a brat. And you open the door to the stairwell, and you hear this sort of ghostly, howly wind sound or come out of the elevator shaft. And just this weird compression areas that happen with the airflow in the building, and it happens in all of them. And it's this background sound that's happening in
There's
the movie.
lots of wind.
And it gets bigger and bigger as the apartment's emptying out, and it slowly starts to become like the entire world is empty except for this woman and her child. We are left with all of these empty rooms and this ghostly howl and this paranoia. Because there is a djinn or some kind of supernatural demonic evil present. And unlike most Western movies, the plot's not worried about all of the neighbors or the local constabularies trying to disprove it. Everyone accepts that it's real. And they get the fuck out of there.
It's in the Quran, so
And I just love, like, that's just a totally different approach that they take to it, but it's fine. And as we slowly get whittled down to this woman and her little kid completely alone, dealing with the terrifying scenario and the fact that at one point she's chasing her child outside and she gets stopped by the police to give her hell for not having her hair covered. She is utterly on her fucking own. There is no one she can go to for help. And she is facing off against things that she has no power against at all. She is completely helpless and at the whim to it. And this is what she is set against. And the movie is escalating spookiness, and it comes from a different culture. Obviously, we're not as familiar with it here.
Well, it takes place in the Iran-Iraq rebellion.
Yeah, and her husband's out in the war, and she just abandoned sort of to hold things together as best she can, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it's just how well modulated the movie is. Like, it's slowly turning the screws. It's patient. It trusts you. It makes things like a blanket moving terrifying. And I'm a big fan. Like, I gave it an honorable mention, but it's like, why isn't it on the list yet again? This whole episode's going to be an echo chamber of that. But if you haven't seen Under the Shadow, and a lot of people haven't, this is my official endorsement.
If you didn't know anything about the movie, this is one of the things I love about it.
Come a little closer, brother.
Oh, sorry. If you didn't know anything about the movie, then I think this is one of the things I love about it, is that it's a war film for really about the first 40 minutes before anything supernatural.
It's sort of the war that brings on the demonic force.
Oh no, it feeds
all
off
of
misery.
the negative energy. Sort of brings
it feeds
out.
off misery, and once it gets an object that is very dear and personal to you, the curse is locked in. I love the fact, and they might have stole this from Repulsion, but I don't care. that giant crack that starts to as her sanity is quickly deteriorating, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until we find out that's how the jinn are getting in.
A very similar thing is used in a movie called The Canal.
Yep.
Like literally the crack in the wall. I mean.
Yeah. So I love that element, but when the supernatural is ramped up, it's terrifying. Even how the thing with the blankets, where we see it go up the stairs or through the roof.
It's my turn to thank Lee for bringing this movie into my life. And I think for 2/3 it feels like a drama.
Yep.
With the backdrop, a brilliant backdrop. They, Iran war, and with all those like bombing drills, and they're constantly everybody's going down to the basement, but there's also kind of their community, but they're also a bit judgmental of each other, and they're worried about kind of there's the creepy kid who got rescued, and just simply because he doesn't talk. Well, he's so traumatized by war, but he's the one who apparently tells the little girl about the demon.
Yep.
And like how all of that builds up. I love the stuff like it talked about the timing of it, the Jane Fonda workout tape.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of it, like within it, there's the cultural pieces. There's certainly an acknowledgement of, for lack of a better term, the sexism within the culture.
Oh no, it's an underlying tension and part of her
all throughout.
enjoying.
And the fact that the father says, "Oh, go and live with my family," and she refuses to do that.
She chooses.
This is her rebellion in some ways.
Yep.
And I mean, like ultimately, what are they trying to do at the end? Trying to get away. I mean, right to the bitter end here. But yeah, when it goes full on horror towards the end, I mean, it's intense. And I've said it more than once here. I feel like I had watched two movies set about a demon set in an apartment building. One a very Americanized films, Chicago apartment building, and then this one just knocked it out of the park for me. And I'm not sure a fraction of the people will see Under the Shadow that will see Evil Dead Rises.
Right.
This performance, Nargis Rashidi.
Let's say that's right.
Yeah. Brilliant from beginning to end, when she's trying to get back into medical school and is being refused
and
for all these stupid reasons, and how she's giving up her dreams there.
Yep.
All throughout, and then just pure survival as a mother trying to protect her daughter. And another, we keep talking about these, sometimes we end up criticizing these child actors. Another wonderful child performance.
Not a step
and
wrong.
I totally believe her as this little girl, and she loses her lucky, what was it, the stuffed...
It's a teddy bear.
The teddy bear. They spend a great chunk of the movie trying to find.
Well, it's the thing that the djinn latches onto. I mean, it
is. Yeah.
It's told early on when we're first introduced to the idea that this is that a djinn exists. That what starts the curse off, or what makes them eternally cursed, unless they can get it away from it, are these like deeply personal objects. And we know for hers, it's that medical book.
Yeah,
because her father had signed it, and obviously it's I think it's an elephant actually.
Okay,
I can't remember.
It was
a stuffed toy.
Yeah,
and that's the last thing we see of this movie.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah,
and it still has the item.
Yeah, but then we have those empty shots.
So even though they have run away, the curse is not over.
No, nothing's defeated.
The last shots are brilliant. I mean, the shots of the apartment.
So that's
and what's
why
left.
I think it's also very similar. It's a very tragic ending with the Babadook as well. But
no.
Well, and I wanted to bring it back. One of the reasons I brought up the Babadook, I mean, obviously the parental thing, but the Babadook, I think, is pretty implicitly like a metaphor for grief and dealing with your trauma, and it never fully goes away. You're always going to be nursing this thing, hence her going down into the basement and feeding her Babadook.
Yeah.
My question is, and I don't know that I have a clear answer, is if the djinn is a metaphor for something, what is it? Is it loneliness? Is it oppression? War? All of these?
Yep. Well,
I thought it was war. That was my take on it.
Well, definitely, once again, it feeds off people's grief.
Yeah.
That's where,
targeting a child. It's interesting, and I don't know if maybe it's a generational trauma of war is being explored here.
Right.
But I know it's not just surface level. Oh, there's a demon after a child, going back to The Exorcist or movies like that. There's a greater purpose in all of this.
It feels like a very personal film.
Yeah. Well, and if the fact that the metaphor or whatever isn't obvious is not necessarily a slight against the movie. It could be a strength. But I felt like there was another note being played, and I wonder again if it was like, am I missing something again culturally, or is it just being careful and subtle about it?
Yep.
We are kind of singing its praises. I do.
Oh, yeah,
I have a few. I try to do this on my show. I try to have a few. If I love a movie,
say some negative things.
Negative things here. I think it's a little bit of a trope to have kind of the creepy mute child, but I understand why it's in there. It was all a dream. Again, I've really been noting, like, it was all a dream seems to be a regular thing in horror movies. I mean, again, that's whatever, but...
Which is not to imply that the movie's all a dream. But
No. But there were some scenes in there that were dream sequences and were just false leads, you know, and I start to get a little bit tired of that, just in any movie in general. Even movies I really like.
There's a scene where she gets out of bed, walks towards the taped window and stands in front of it. Yeah. And I'm like, we're about to have a jump scare. And then... And
there it is.
We had our jump scare. And nothing else in the movie had been that sort of telegraphed before that. But again, it's a little small complaint.
And the mother's so brilliant through the entire film and how she handles things, but I'm not sure why she opens the door. There's that key moment where she opens the door and she lets the demon in. Was my take on it. Like, why does there's nobody outside there?
She wanted the demon off of her kid and onto her.
Yes, that's what she's trying to do.
She does the barter system. She takes the book out, and then all of a sudden the animal ends up in the book ends up in the lockbox.
Yep.
So like she is trying to communicate and barter with this thing in her own limited way, but she seems to have understanding of it that we are not gained access to. And again, maybe if we're familiar with the Jinn lore, like maybe there's rules, like the way we inherently understand the rules of werewolves and vampires. There are rules to dealing with jinns, and you make offerings to them, or you barter with them to get them to change your mind. And you'd think in wartime, with this much misery going around, there'd be plenty of places for it to go. But here's these two vulnerable people alone in this huge building.
Yeah.
Well, let's play.
Yep.
And then, just again, another really picky one, but there's a sequence where the mother and daughter are physically in an altercation, and I don't believe for a moment that the daughter would overpower her mother.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't think she's possessed by the demon at that point. I didn't quite get how that happened. But these are really nitpicky things. It's a great movie that lots of people should check out.
Yeah. And I mean, it does focus, like, the stress is building along with the suspense. As closer as we're getting to this standoff between the Jinn or this demon, she's getting weaker every step of the way, and it's getting stronger every step of the way, and you feel it.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's felt, not said. That's a hard thing to pull off.
But the daughter's getting weaker too, I think, as well.
So it's sucking away at her.
Yeah. And again, it's not a feel-good picture necessarily, but it's not devastating either. No. There's been a lot of hella dark movies. Like, I think it leaves you in an uncertain place, but it's not the kick in the balls that a lot of this decade.
It's not a happy ending, but it's not. Well, I just think the world is awful.
Yeah. Evil exists.
We entertained tonight.
And it will continue to exist, so be wary.
Yeah. Evil is AI Hollywood scripts.
That's right. In 24th position, this is a weird one. I really wanted to put... This is where my tie shows up. And originally I wanted to talk about the duo of guys who did Spring, movie you and I talked about, and Endless. Benson Moorhead, I believe they called themselves.
Yep.
And that was originally what the space was for. And I still want to shout those guys out. I still think Resolution and The Spring and The Endless and Synchronicity, all 4 movies made that decade, all on a low budget, are all absolutely worth your time. But I don't know how much they are horror movies. They're really close to being horror movies, but they're walking the line.
Oh, I think
and I think they have buzz about them. They have noise about them.
Yep.
I want to talk about a director I think people have forgotten. They didn't forget him in 1999 when he made a little movie called The Blair Witch Project with his friend Daniel Myrick. But Eduardo Sanchez has never stopped making horror movies. And I think he made two this decade that were both completely ignored and that were both completely fucking solid. I'm going to first talk about Lovely Molly. This is a haunting and haunted movie because it's, again, a slow psychological disintegration of a main character, and we know where the movie's going. But right before the movie came out, the supporting actor in the film lost his mind, murdered this well-loved woman in Hollywood who would use her property to rent out to up-and-coming actors. He killed her and then himself right before this movie was coming out. And it just put this ugly cloud over it. Also, in the movie, he plays the positive good guy character that's trying to help Molly get her shit together. So it's like, once you know the context of it, the whole movie becomes difficult to process in the same way. So it's a very serious, very tough psychological horror movie that nobody watched. Someone watch it. The other one is the complete opposite of that. People complained about the Blair Witch Project being a found footage movie where you saw nothing. Well, Exists is a found footage movie where you see everything. It's a Bigfoot found footage movie where the camera just happens to find its way to the most perfect spot to show you the best angle on the Bigfoot violence. It is not a smart movie, but he is not repeating himself. It is a very different found footage movie than the Blair Witch Project. And yeah, he could sell the movie, or thought he could sell the movie better by saying from the director of Blair Witch. But here, with Lovely Molly and Exists, are two fantastic, I think, horror movies that nobody has seen.
Yep. And I'm guilty.
Drives me crazy.
Guilty. I haven't seen either of them, but I've written them down.
Yeah, maybe they're a little bit high, and maybe Benson Moorhead should be here, but I'm shouting them out. So that's my 24th position. Mr. Beckmann.
I've seen The Endless and I have seen Spring.
Right.
I have not seen Lovely Molly.
Okay.
But there you go.
What's your 23rd position then, brother?
So there's this guy called Robert Eggers.
Oh, yes. I'm aware of him.
Yes. I think he's pretty good. But I'm not choosing the film that I think most people thought would be on the list. I need to give The Witch Another Day in Court. I started it late, and that's a movie that, although it's unbelievably creepy and moody, it kind of moves at a slower pace. But once again, and like this is just an emotional pick.
Okay, you're allowed personal choices.
Yeah. I love me stories that have that sort of no exit, hell is other people, Lovecraftian sort of, and also shot in glorious black and white, glorious black and white. But The Lighthouse is so good. The first time I saw it, I knew right away that it was going to be, if not one of the best films of the decade, at least one of the best horror films. And once again, it's not a boo out of the dark thing. It's just one of those hell is other people. There's a mystery unraveling. I love everything about the seagull. Robert Pattinson is really good, but for my money, William fucking Dafoe. So good. So good. I could just, I watched that movie and just fall in love every single time. I can understand why people wouldn't call it a horror film because they would call it like a surrealist drama.
I don't think I would call it a horror movie, to be honest. I think it's like an absurdist theater piece.
Yeah. And
some moments are horrific, but
sure.
But it's one of those, artsy horror films in some ways, but I can understand why it's not on the list. I can understand why I'm sure it's probably not on either of your lists, but Willem Dafoe, man. Willem Dafoe. He's just great as like the lighthouse keeper.
Yeah.
I love me, The Lighthouse.
It was built up way too big, too much for me. When I saw it, I was ultimately in between to disappointed. It looks great. The photography is brilliant for sure. And William Dafoe's performance was, I was expecting the moon, the sun, and the stars, and I need to revisit it and kind of put it down to earth and see. It didn't work for me as well as I thought it was going to, because individual scenes I had students when I was teaching about Edgar Allan Poe and horror bring in clips of it to kind of do some stuff for a creative presentation. I was like, why haven't I seen that yet? This is gonna be like one of the great films of the year. It was touted as, and it was there for me. I mean, I think the two were good together. There's some writing things I think that kind of got in the way for me, but I don't know. I promise I'll watch it again, but it's not on my list. I consider it a horror movie, though. I did consider it a horror movie.
What I would say about The Lighthouse, and it is not on my list.
Yep.
I think that The Witch is an A+ horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think The Lighthouse is a B- art house movie.
Alrighty.
I think that it was oversold. I think that there is good acting in it. I think there is good atmosphere in it. I think there is a cool vibe about it, but it's overrated, in my humble opinion.
So we agree.
It happened, Dubray. I don't think I would give it a negative review.
No.
But I am
and
not.
I'm not either, by the way.
I'm not foaming at the mouth about it.
I thought it was going to be this is the greatest thing to come to cinema, and
not so much.
Jason, so on to my number 23. This is where, as much as I have some issues with a couple things, but I think they kind of got corrected. I'm breaking them up, and one's not making my list, but It Chapter 1 is going to be on my list here at number 23. Andreas Muschietti.
Andre Muschietti. Yeah.
Andre Muschietti. Yeah. Yeah. And I know he did Mama, which I still haven't seen. Right. So spoilers, it's not on my list. And yeah. But I think it tapped into, like, they had a budget for it, and it was a monster hit, probably way bigger than they were expecting. Most successful, to my knowledge, still the most successful horror movie box office wise. It was breaking records at the time, and people were hungry for an R-rated version of Stephen King's It.
And I think they were primed by the miniseries.
Yeah, and enough by it. And I think, like, this is ultimately better made than the miniseries. I would still say the children's portion of the miniseries is better than this.
Yeah.
But that Sophia Lillis as Beverly Marsh,
yeah,
I think steals actually
the movie.
Both movies, even though she's barely in the second one, and it's kind of there's kind of problems with that. To the point where this movie got me so excited for Chapter 2 that, again, my expectations were so high, and when Chapter 2 is not awful, but a little bit of a mess, it was a letdown.
I will defend we can't get Chapter 2 against its haters, but it didn't even. Wasn't even considered.
I'm not a hater on it. I know the first time I saw it, I rewatched it just in case for this, but I kind of had a miserable time in an IMAX theater where it would not end,
right?
And it was so noisy and special effect, and I just wanted and I just did not care for the adults. But that's about that one. This one works well. The level of bullying, the understanding of middle years kids. I still like setting the children's story in the 50s more than the 80s.
Yeah.
But for a modern audience, I guess they would get a little bit more out of us. I really like how they dealt with, like, the concept of abuse effectively. We've talked about this before. What they did to Beverly Marsh after, like, one of the great sequences where she fights back against her father, and suddenly she's turned into
a hostage.
She needs to be rescued by the boys. I know this was supposed to bring them back together when they're separated and all that, but that was a mistake, and it was
an unnecessary
I
change.
think some of these moves along the way, and the fact that, again, I've talked to you about my issues with Sarsgaard and as Pennywise, hold it back from being in, like, say, the top 10 of this list. I think it's a solid horror movie, and it had to be on my list.
As far as pop culture is concerned, it should be on the list high. Chapter 1 we'll be talking about again. Chapter 2, I never even considered it for the list.
Good.
But I don't dismiss it either, because it's a tough nut to crack.
Well, I gave it another day in court because I thought, well, maybe it was the day and time when I watched it, and
No, it's a full letter grade, if not 2 down from the first half.
Yes.
It just is. We will be talking about that one again. I think
we'll be talking about it thrice.
Yeah. I think that one of the big things about that is that they had not just the Lucky 7 loser club, but also Georgie and the Bullies. You have a cast of children.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just have, like, one crucial kid performance. You have over half a dozen.
Yeah.
And the feat of casting that movie must have been really tough, and they nailed it.
It reminds me of Stand By Me in
Yeah.
that sense. I mean, that to be able
They
to
had
direct
to
a
take
cast of
time,
children,
and they had to
Yeah.
really get the right kid for
Yeah.
the right part, and they did. So bravo. 23. It's my turn, Jason, to pick a title that people might say, but that's not a horror movie. And as we mentioned before, Don't Breathe being probably the best example of that. There were a lot of these super intense thrillers that you could go either way with. Don't Breathe is really horror enough in a lot of grounds. But again, the one that they miss, I think, from Joe Carnahan, starring Liam Neeson, The Grey.
Yep.
If
I went back and forth in that one.
If you haven't seen The Grey, or if you're asking yourself, is that a horror movie? Much like I said with Ex Machina, watch it again.
Yep.
That is a fucking horror movie.
Yep.
It is about conflicting, like the conflict of dealing with the fact that our lives are finite. That despite humanity's best efforts, the mortality rate remains stubbornly at 100%.
Yeah.
And on your day-to-day basis, you can say, yeah, I'm going to die, but it's some faraway date in the future and I don't have to worry about it. But when that date is put in front of you, that's what The Grey is about. And I think it's terrifying. I think it's more than scary. I think it is terrifying. And I understand if you missed it because there was so many forgettable Liam Neeson action thrillers. Like, I think they do 2 or 3 of them a year, and some of them...
They're still being produced.
Yeah, no. It is like this 68-year-old action star. And, yeah, I get that. So, feel free to look the other way on all of those. But if you missed The Grey, definitely check it out. It got a little bit shit on because, the way the wolves were portrayed. And again, I think we're dealing with bigger things. I don't think we're dealing with wolves.
Yeah.
Right? We're dealing with mortality.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to your review on the show when you were very
positive.
And I was like, I have to check that out because it was when I treated it the same way. Here's another Liam Neeson movie that's out in January.
Yeah.
And I still haven't seen it. And then when I was kind of doing a broad list of horror movies, I don't think it was listed or categorized as horror.
Maybe. Yeah.
And so I kind of forgotten about that. So I that's one I really feel like I should have watched by now, and I haven't. So
it's so good.
Add it to the list, man. I
Yeah,
really
it's
think
so good.
I'm sure I'll love it.
Yeah.
I do apologize for Liam Neeson on a regular basis because I like some of those dumb action movies.
Don't
sometimes.
apologize about Liam Neeson. This is the first time out of all the movies I went, fuck, I missed it.
Yeah, that one should have been there.
That should have been there. It's so good. I love the fact that that movie. I think the wolves are real. I think the wolves are real.
Oh no, they are like as in the context of the story.
Yeah.
But if they're not acting like wolves, the purpose that they're filling is your death is coming. It could be fire, it could be ice, it could be wolves, but your death is after you, and you have to deal with it. Right now.
I've seen enough visual essays about that movie arguing that the fact that the wolves they're just metaphor, man.
Right.
But
they are really being pursued by a pack of wolves. They're not. The
fact that Liam Neeson kind of goes in and out of consciousness more than once.
Yeah.
You can make that argument, I guess, but that the first time we even see them, when they just turn the flashlight and one is just eating away at a corpse, and then also a shout out when they're running in a blizzard and the Pax just starts and they've zeroed in on the weakest physical link at that point. Once again,
it taps into that primal nature survival situation where it's just something I know about myself. If one day all the lights went out and we had to go back to living in the woods, I'm fucked.
Yep.
And I know it for a fact. I am
Yep.
fucked. I'm not going to be able to catch a squirrel, not alone a dozen to feed myself and my family. I am fucked.
Yeah.
And this movie lays that nakedly bare for me.
Yeah. It also taps into... I've always been wrestling with this story, and I've worked as an animal patrol officer, and we would track these dogs sometimes for months. We would just be late getting there, because there was almost a top 10 list of missing dogs. It wasn't as elaborate as that, but there were some dogs over a span of a year that we got calls on, and we would get to, and we would found its den and everything. And I thought, what would happen if it was a pack of really big dogs that got so feral that they started picking off one by one. And The Grey is a lot like that.
Yeah. It's supposedly set in the wilds of Alaska, but it might as well be Canada.
Yeah, no, it's solid, strong choice. And this is the first time where I'm going, fuck.
Well, check it out, Dubray. I think you might get something out of it.
Yep.
What's your next selection, Mr.
So, at number 23, I do believe.
22.
I have both Jonathan Ford and Howard J. Ford's The Dead. We talked about this movie a couple of weeks ago, and I went, oh yeah! So I watched it again and went, you know what? That's really good. That's really good.
There needed to be more zombies on my list, and unfortunately I couldn't find room for The Dead. I really like it. It was made in Africa, and the sequel was made in India, and apparently both of them were nightmare productions.
Yeah.
But they bring back slow Romero zombies, and they make them scary again.
Yeah.
And it's really
called The Dead?
The Dead, yeah.
And there's The Dead 2. It's the Ford brothers are the directors.
Yeah, there is a YouTube podcast show called Good Bad Flicks, Larry, that I know that you're aware of. I would recommend watching it after you see the movie and just talk, because they go into detail about everything that went wrong, from like the lead actor getting malaria to at some point the gangs around where they were shooting interrupted and like threatened their lives.
It's not a fairy tale story either. It didn't end with them making their fame and fortune in Hollywood. They made these two amazing zombie movies.
Yeah.
And then they went back to their lives with their tails between their legs.
They have
and both of them are solid.
Yeah. They have since made a movie each separately.
Okay.
But I didn't even know of them. Like, I hadn't heard of them. They're both thrillers. One's more of a director of photography, where the other one I think is like, writing, directing the actors kind of thing. The Dead is so solid. I think I have some sentimental value because it takes place in Africa.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me, and because it's an independent production, like all of a sudden I started asking questions. How did they actually get those, actors to be run over by trucks? Like, how did they do it? I found myself really asking those questions because
they had, because of where they shot it, the opportunity to give the movie the feeling of scale and epicness.
Yeah.
Because of the landscapes that they were working with, but they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
And that shows up in, like, we don't see the plane crash. We see him washing up on the beach. And the central actor is better at his behavior and his action.
Yeah.
His dialogue scenes, you can tell he's a new actor.
Yeah.
But nothing breaks the movie.
Yeah.
It's another one of many that I wish I could find room for on the list.
Yep. I also love just little scenes like the actor, sleeping in the tree and waking up and going, whoa. Even the opening, after the opening crawl where the airplane's going down and that person's infected and you're just going, good God. And then it shows to all the chaos going down. The fact that one of the lead actors that we first think is the protagonist, like he is a protagonist, but gets bitten and like essentially chomped on
very early.
And you're just going, wow, this is the 1 hour and 20 minute mark when it's an hour and 40 minutes and everything. Like lots of things surprised me about the movie. I was never bored. It's wonderfully gory.
I also think that they really leaned on the fast, aggressive zombies. Ever since the remake of Dawn, 28 Days Later, it wasn't enough to have the slow, moody Romero. Only Walking Dead and The Dead seem to stick to Romero's zombies, and I respect them respecting the lore. So, good choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the title.
I can lend it to you. I have it here.
Yeah, I'd very much like to check it out. Especially, I like the Romero zombies.
It's
prefer
very
that
much a loving homage to.
22 for me, directed by Greg McLean, and it is penned by one of the most important filmmakers we have right now, James Gunn. It is the Belko Experiment.
Oh, really?
Which, again, your podcast introduced me to it. And I mean, I really love the cast. I love this take on The Office. There's all of the routines of The Office and the people in there, and when they get trapped in this situation and somebody has to die in this period of time, and people start being tribal and turning on each other, I could see that happening in any workplace. And it is creative. It is violent. It sort of reminds me a little bit of Battle Royale in a sense. And this, I really like this actor, John Gallagher Jr. He was on the Newsroom
We'll be talking about him
TV
again.
show. Yeah, I think I might be talking about him again too. He anchors this film really well, and there's some great actors, Tony Goldwyn, but one of the pleasures is to see Michael Rooker just being a guy. Like, he's an ordinary guy. He's not
a piece
a
of
serial
shit.
killer. He's not a villain or anything. Like, we kind of, feel bad for what happens to him, too.
I also like that it's a movie based on a dream. James Gunn had a dream. It didn't make sense to him, but it stuck with him enough that he wrote the screenplay because of it. And it's not on my list. I think it's like it's one of these ones I was talking about, like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
It's
kind
a
of has
really
that.
cool conceptual idea for a movie, but it's sort of, I don't know. I guess I didn't register it as a horror movie. It's more of a sci-fi speculative fiction of some kind. I really like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. It's a very distinct individual meal. I'm glad it's on your list, but it didn't
when we
make
discover, like, that
It's a good movie.
shot at the end is like, oh my God, this is
I
even
had it-
worse than I imagined.
It's so much worse.
Yeah, I had it more in the action thriller, but I could definitely understand the horror element of it. It's not on my list.
If
The-
you
the
like
violence
it
is out
too,
there.
there's another movie called Mayhem
Yeah.
with Samara Weaving and called Mayhem.
Stephen
Young.
Young.
It's they're in a building, but there's a chemical leak that makes everybody go crazy, so they lock off the building. It's kind of similar, but Mayhem's more, I think, acutely funny and over the top, whereas Belko's kind of exploring something.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so that's my turn. In 22nd place, Babadook.
Really?
It made the list.
I am kind of surprised it's as low as it is, but okay.
And I think spiritually, what it would be tied to for me is Under the Shadow. I think that that can be the honorable mention. Like, I would love to have Under the Shadow on this list too. Again, but they're both about mothers.
Yeah.
They're both about supernatural oppression, and they're both like abandoned by their husband. One, the husband's off at the war. The other one, the husband has died. But I'm gonna give it to the Babadook. The performance they got out of this little kid. What's his name? Maybe I can have it here. It's not one of these things where they found like a professional child actor. They finessed this performance out of this little kid with, I'm sure, endless amount of patience.
Yeah.
And if there's something that people take away from the movie, sometimes people don't like the little kid performance.
Yeah.
I think it utterly works.
Yep.
Why is it not higher on the list? I think it could be accused of being a little bit overhyped in that the basic story it's telling about parental resentment, we've seen before. In fact, you could argue it was perfected in The Shining. And the A, B, and C of it is not that dissimilar to your average Conjuring franchise or Insidious. Like, there's a creature in the dark, there's going to be a quiet, someone's going to get yeeted supernaturally across the room. Everything you expect to see in one of these types of movies is absolutely in the Babadook.
Yep.
But it's just somehow one notch above.
Okay.
And I like Jennifer Kent, like she was an actress out of Australia, and she just wasn't getting enough work. She was in Babe and a few other high-profile things, but it was never happening for her. So this was a long-term make work for herself project, and it paid off for her huge.
Yeah.
I was very off-put by her follow-up to this movie called The Nightingale.
Yeah.
But I would not scratch her off my list. It's a well-directed movie, but it makes The Revenant seem warm by contrast.
Wow. Yep. I agree.
But I don't know. I couldn't dismiss the Babadook. It's definitely on the list. And if you like the Babadook, you will like Under the Shadow. If you like Under the Shadow, you will like the Babadook.
Yeah.
So, 22nd position for me is the Babadook. I assume it's showing up later on your list.
Oh yeah, it's pretty high. I'm just sort of I figured we would be talking about it. I just thought it would be higher than you gave it. But I mean, respect.
It's another one that I thought was going to be on my list and was on the long list of runners up.
Okay.
I don't know. I loved it at the time. It kind of faded for me a little bit, and it's a tough one. It's one I would think about. Like most people will, horror fans will have it on their list.
There were a lot of movies like this Like the whole Conjuring franchise, again, I hate to be so dismissive of the Conjuring franchise. Like the whole Conjuring universe has made more bank than I think all of the movies I've mentioned so far added up together. But people know about the Conjuring, so I like to go a little bit more.
And not everybody heard about the Babadook initially, but it was a real cult following. Then it became big, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I really enjoy it too. I just didn't make my list of 30. So.
Yeah, it's not a thumbs down review.
No.
So at number 21, there's this guy, Larry, that I'm sure you know. His name is Mike Flanagan.
Oh yeah,
and
I'm aware of his work.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, a lot of the movies he made this decade could have easily been on this list. And I cried when I started really I had to cut away.
Right.
And I went with my heart. Because Oculus is so terrifying. it was the one film that where I had fingernail marks into my couch.
Oh wow!
As I was watching that movie, Katie Sackhoff is really good in that movie. The other Gillian, I'm drawing a blank. The sister.
Karen Gillan.
Pardon?
Karen Gillan.
Karen Gillan.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Once again, there's just great shots great composition shots. Even when Karen Gillan, first shows up, and it's just her ponytail kind of moving back and forth as she's walking down the hall. I like little things like that.
Yeah.
It's a great ghost story. I love me. A special shout out to Hush. It's once again one of those
Gallagher Jr.
Yes, it's another home invasion thriller. But man, did I want to jump into the screen and punch that actor.
Like that movie a lot. Would love to add it to my wall. Can't.
Yeah.
Netflix won't
so
sell
good.
it.
So good. Once again, Dr. Sleep, he made a strong sequel and paid homage to the novel in a really good way. Dr. Sleep was on my list up until recently, and I was like, but I could not remove Oculus.
We'll be talking about Mike Flanagan, and I do like Oculus a lot, but that's not the one I picked.
We'll be talking about Mike Flanagan. Oculus was honorable mention, probably number 31 or 32, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It was very close to making my list. But spoilers, I have a lot of Flanagan on here. And so
Flanagan is going to be well represented.
Well represented on my list.
Also, once again, I hang my head that I couldn't put more Flanagan. I have no excuse.
Gerald's Game was an unfucking filmable book. Yeah. And he made a hell of a movie out of it.
Yeah.
So, yes, I am not going to fight you on your choice.
Yeah. I just feel bad I couldn't add more, to be perfectly honest.
Sorry,
21st. And again, you've kind of alluded to the fact that whether this is a horror movie or not, I think with the creature stuff, there's enough horror in here. It's a movie I reviewed on your show called Spring.
Lovely.
I love. It's a beautiful movie. The reason it could have been higher, it almost had the same sort of thing where I didn't like. Again, I think it was Detroit. They start off in. I didn't like any of the characters or anything that was going on. But once we got to Italy, the movie got going, and it was spectacular. I mean, I was moved by it. I think when we were even talking about it, I was near tears talking about this. It's a horror story. But it's a creature film. It is a romantic film. It's sweet. It's beautifully shot. I mean, I wasn't sure, looking at kind of the contrast of the first 20 minutes or so of the movie, that these guys also had this quality in them to get to that point. And I really love the actor here. Get her name, Nadia Hilker. Yeah. Nadia Hilker kind of steals the movie for me. I don't understand. Everybody in the world. I know not everybody in the world, but a lot of people in the world would fall in love with this character and this actor, and
you definitely get why he's attracted to her, and you definitely want it to work out for them, which is essential to making the movie work.
I knew nothing about it until it was on a list of movies that we did a show for.
Yeah.
So
it's really good.
I love that selection. I'm glad it's on your list. Like I said, I wanted to mention them, but again, is it a horror movie? It's got a creature in it. It's got some really dark stuff in it, and I mean, if you had to sell the movie, that would be the way to sell it, but it's so much more than a horror movie. Same thing with The Endless. It's so much more than just a horror movie.
Oh, I would agree it's a horror movie.
it could appeal to a broad range of, like, you can take your girlfriend or your wife to see this movie.
yeah.
Not to, like, stereotype, because there's lots of female horror fans, I know, but those who love romance movies will get something out of it. Those who love horror movies will get something out of it. I think it's
any other decade
quite a
it
balance.
would make my list just
Yeah.
because I want people to watch the movie.
Yeah.
That's the same reason like We Are Still Here is on the list. It's I love the movie, but I also just want more people to watch it. And I
Yes.
feel the same way about Spring and The Endless and Resolution.
all of
like
them, and we can't have them all on the
and
list.
I
I
can't put them
understand.
all on the list.
Yeah,
so
they aren't all. Yeah.
I'm saying thank you for including Spring.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Spring?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, you did.
What you told me about, I'm like, me Reiki.
Yeah.
Me Reiki.
I think it was number one when we
did it.
reviewed it.
Yeah. Well, my last pick, again, another one that's highly personal and that not enough people have seen. It wasn't on my list. It wasn't, and then I rewatched it, and its quality's reasserted itself. It's called Starry Eyes.
Yeah.
Controversial. They wanted me to pick a fight with you, Dubray. He said, I'm going to see if I can top out the mic level.
Mm-hmm.
This is the movie that David Lynch was trying and failing to make when he made Mulholland Drive.
Ooh.
This is the poisonous, evil Hollywood that one has to sacrifice their soul to in order to reach their satisfaction. And the other reason you're probably not going to be a fan of it is the co-directors of this motion picture. Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Windmeyer were the gentlemen who were hired to do the remake of Pet Sematary. And the reason I was excited about the remake of Pet Sematary was not because I thought they needed a remake of Pet Sematary, but because of how much I liked Starry Eyes. And I still have a lot of respect for them. There's a quote on the cover of this case that I'm going to hear, and it sounds hyperbolic, but I think it's on point. If David Lynch and David Cronenberg came together to craft a gory psychological mind bender, it might be Starry Eyes.
This sounds like I would enjoy it then.
Is their first fucking movie.
Wow.
And to be put in that company seems like they're trying to sell DVDs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it backs up. I was going back and forth on what was going to be top of the first list, if it was going to be Babadook or this one. Upon rewatching it, it dethroned Babadook.
Yeah.
So, also the main actress in it, she plays the mom in Dr. Sleep, the Shelley Duvall character.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on her name right now, but she gives a hell of a performance in this movie. There's an audition scene in Mulholland Drive that everybody likes to talk about as a scene that sort of made the career of Naomi Watts in a lot of ways. She is incredible in that scene. There's an audition sequence in this movie and a follow-up sequence with her reacting to how the audition went into the bathroom that knocks that scene out of the fucking water, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I can't get mad because I haven't seen it, so...
Well, see it and get mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
So that's the first block of 10 reviews taken care of, or ranks, pardon me, for the 20 teens taken care of, and the first couple of reviews. We got 2 more episodes of this to get through this incredibly rich decade. I hope you're enjoying it, because there is more to come. Send your feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. If you need something to fill your ears with between the episodes, there's the Shelf Shedding Movie Show and the Terror Table Podcast, which are good friends of mine. And thank you so much for listening to Rank and Review. This is your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, and we'll be hearing you, or you'll be hearing me real soon.